this is not graded, but you guys all get A+s to come in to a dark auditorium on such a beautiful day. Thank you. We're getting the last folks in, and we're going to start in 1 minute. Okay, should we do one more stand up, stretch, breathe? Home stretch. Are you having fun? Is this interesting? So, just one thing to canoodle in your book. After Matthew is done at about 3:30 or so, we're just going to ask 2 questions. So if you can start thinking about it, just to get feedback on kind of where we go from here, is 1, why did you come? Right? Like to know. And then where do you think we should go next? You know, we have the courses and we have dialogues, but if you had a dream, because this was a dream, like how to help, this is a co-creation process. So if over the next 2 hours, you can just think about that. We'd love to take 15 or 20 minutes or so, just to get your feedback and talk about it. Also, we'd love your written feedback because, you know, Jonathan is a key part of that and he's our quant jock here. But you'll see the QR code in the back of the program. If you could fill it out to get your feedback, what worked, what didn't, what did you like, what did you not like, how could we make it better, that would be awesome as well. And the third piece is Teton Valley Books, which we're so grateful to. Yay to local bookstores, right? So Amy has been so sweet, so busy, and she's come here. Everybody has books. I even wrote a book that I tell nobody about, but I put it out there. Someday I'll get the guts to market it. Anyway, everybody after at 4 o'clock or whenever we're done, 3:45, will be out there and we'll give them pens if you want to buy anybody's book and have it autographed. So just to know that. So. You can stay standing or you can sit down now. It's up to you. So huge thanks to Nick and Betsy and Carly and Andrew and Chris and Christine for this morning. Just thank you. And now we're going to have a little bit of fun, because one thing that's also been shown to be true in all of these frameworks is we all have patterns. And while we're all really unique, and we are, our uniqueness often falls into patterns, right? And for a lot of people here and leaders, there's all sorts of tests or evaluations out there, you know, in the Enneagram or the Myers-Briggs or Caliper or whatever. And they're, you know, somewhat interesting to help us understand ourselves and understand other people. But my question is, how many people like took some kind of like mythology class somewhere in school? Like, and you know, we hear a lot about especially Greek mythology, but there's many mythologies. And like the question is, what does it feel like if I could be like Athena? Like, who would Athena be in this? Or if, you know, maybe it's a Zeus day. Or do I have a pattern or archetype that actually fits in some of those stories? And maybe how can I expand that and shift those? Well, a few years ago, I was honored enough to meet Craig Chalquist. And truly, I think he knows more about mythology over the last 5,000 years across the globe, and more stories of all of those myths than anyone I've ever met. And it's really fascinating to be able to say, how does that help us? How can we shift that world we live in? Because purpose and values are huge. But what are those underlying stories, those underlying myths, those underlying biases that we might not even know until we choose to become conscious of them and bring them to light? And then how can we shift them? So I'm really honored to invite Craig to help us think about how do we restore leadership. So thank you.
All right, hello everybody. So what I wanted to do to start off with is give you a little bit of a view of our path forward over the next 45 minutes or so. And then we're going to do a panel, 2 more local leaders to talk to. So what I'd like to do is talk about storying and leadership. And I know there's a lot going on right now about research into storytelling and things like that. I brought a little science with me, but we're going to go, I think, a bit deeper than that and talk about some of these basic story patterns that show up a lot for us as leaders. So we'll see a little bit about what that looks like. And then after that, I want to look at some of the really old stories, which here we call them myths. Other countries call them the traditional tales or the old tales or what have you. And see if there's something more to them, and I think there will be, to the wisdom that they carry that applies across time periods, because the same human situations for leaders and for everybody recur over time, over and over again. So we'll have a glance at that. And then I coined this word lorology to try to figure out what I do. And I've worn different hats professionally, but none of them ever fit quite right. So I'm going to say a little bit more about that because it's what I actually do professionally now. And it has to do with work with story. So we'll see what that looks like. And then from there, we'll go into the importance of enchantment and why that matters to us as leaders. We'll have a look at that. And finally, I want to mention 3 powers of enchanted leadership, and that's what we'll finish with. So that's where we're heading. So a little bit about me. Had to borrow that from the post office, that picture over there. So help me remember to bring it back when I'm done. But I wanted to just mention a couple of things because they're directly relevant to what we're doing here. So in terms of, let's see here. So depth psychology, we're going to be doing some of that today. When I say sometimes that I'm a depth psychologist, people hear that as death psychologist. So I wanted to make sure to spell it right on my own slide. But it has to do with looking at symbolism, how the unconscious speaks to us, what our dreams might be trying to tell us. There's a lot of mythology in depth psychology. So we'll have a look at that as we go and see what we can learn from that. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is I don't work as a psychotherapist anymore. I did on and off for about 9 years. And during that time, in I guess about year 2, so when I was an intern, I took an intern position working with men who had all committed violent crimes, anywhere from assault and battery to murder. And then they went to jail or prison. They did their time. They came out, and they were mandated by the courts to do a year of therapy with us. In California, which is where I'm from, you have to train for a year to do that kind of work because it's fairly risky compared to ordinary therapy work for obvious reasons. So I did that on and off for 6 years, usually 3 times a week. I went to court every week on behalf of the men in my programs when I learned to lead the programs. And court was the boring part in some ways, but the exciting part for me was I started teaching the men in my programs, just kind of on a whim, the hero's journey, which Joseph Campbell has explicated and Hollywood now got a hold of, more or less. So I'm mentioning this because that taught me a little bit more about the power of myth to make an actual difference to how people live. And as a group leader, I was able to step into that a little bit and use different figures from mythology to help the men understand that they had different options than the ones that they were picking, which of course were disastrous for them as well as their victims. So that's where some of this comes from too. Sandy asked a good question earlier. I wanted to ask all of you, how many of you who had one of those mythology classes that she asked about found them to be terribly boring? And I'll raise my hand because I did. Well, that's great. I'm actually heartened by the fact that I don't see anybody else's hand up. Anybody up there? No? That's great that I'm the only one because mine was so boring. I had it in, I guess it was middle school now that I think of it, and I couldn't see what the relevance was. So by studying depth psychology and using it in my programs, I started to get an understanding. So we'll go into that a little bit as we move forward. So let's start with storying leadership. One of the things I'll do a few times with you is go through a little bit of etymology very briefly, and the reason is that oftentimes the roots of words have a story, and sometimes it's a mythic story. In this case, if we look at lead as a verb, so to guide and to travel, it fits nicely with what we were hearing earlier from the other presenters. And I really like to go forth, that there's something exploratory about that. But then when we look at that word as a noun, of course it's a different word in English, led, and to wait, or to wait and to plummet. And I think we've all had the experience of that sort of leadership that's not inspiring. And a key takeaway, which I'll mention again later in this presentation, is that what fires me up and gives me passion is leadership that inspires. And I know there's been a lot of talk about that, but I want to go a little bit more below the surface when we get into this. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. And the reason, so now I'm looking at it through a mythological lens, the reason I refer to it as heroic leadership is because it tends to be based on that model, especially in the States. We love the hero. And whenever anyone does something decent for somebody else and it gets into the news, it's all about this person's the town hero now, which is fine to a point. But when you read about actual heroes through the mythologies around the world, one of the things that is very clear to these storytellers is that heroes are very dangerous people. When you read about Gilgamesh or Heracles, and afterwards, or Cuchulainn from the Irish stories, it's like, wow, these people were really out of control. So, I mean, they tore up forests, they burned themselves up. I mean, it's like, I don't think I want to emulate this, you know? So, hero, it has a shadow side. It has a tough side to it. And this is some of what we see when we lead, usually unconsciously, from kind of a heroic position. I'm thinking of Betsy's term that she used earlier, command and control style of leadership, right? And when I translate that mythically, I tend to think of that as kind of the shadow side of heroic leadership. And we've all known people who did this. Some of us, including me, have done it ourselves. But top down, I'm the one who decides, not collaborative. That's a shadow side of all this. It's codependent. And what I mean by this, and by the way, I teach a class on codependency online for a group called Young Platform because it's such a huge problem. But it reinforces other people's dependency. It's a leadership style that says, I'm the one who's important, depend on me, which makes people weak. Micromanaging, we all know what that is. I've quit 3 different jobs because I had micromanaging bosses. And I already talked to non-collaborative, lack of mentoring, obviously, right? If you're the one who matters the most, why should you mentor other people? And lack of transparency. There was a school I worked at, I was second in charge. So my title was associate provost, and I was acting president when the president visited China. And I don't know how many times I told him when we would discuss policy or something would come up in terms of running the school, and he would say, well, this affects faculty and other administrators and blah, 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 and we've got to think about this. And I would be like, just tell them, include them in the conversation. And invariably, they'd find out later and be mad, understandably, and trust just plummets when you do that kind of leadership. So that's why that's on the list. And then a limited view of consequences. We're good in this culture at thinking in the linear, not so good at thinking in the round. Thinking ecologically is one way of talking about it. That when you affect this over here, 3 other things over here that don't seem connected are, right? So a question, how do we get to leadership that's wise, but also how can we do it in a way that lets us understand the story of what that actually looks like? And so let's look at some of these old stories. We have limited time, so I can't actually be a storyteller and go through one of them, but I can touch on them a little bit, and that's what I'm going to do next. So before I do that, a little bit about why story matters. The more I study psychology, which I've been doing since college, back in the Pleistocene, the more I always go back to story as a basic explanation for how the psyche works, how we work, how the mind works. Some people say we're the hero in our own story. Sometimes we are. I prefer to say protagonist, but whatever. It's a frame of orientation, and it tends to organize information, including different kinds of quantitative data. When we hear about numbers and statistics, and we heard some really good ones yesterday that really matter, what we also got to hear is, what does this mean for you as a community? What is the bigger story behind these numbers? And that's where they really land. So we not only need to know what the facts mean, we need to understand what the story is underneath the facts, and then it makes sense to us. It's context, right? And I listed a couple of other things. Story involves more of the brain. It brings the heart in. We heard about that earlier. Sometimes it's a good distance from tough issues. There's cultures where somebody's behaving in a way that's inappropriate in a particular cultural group. And oftentimes the elder members of the culture will say, you know, this reminds me of a time when, and they'll say something out of their deep cultural lore. And they feel that this is less shaming than calling people out, especially in a group, right? So they'll handle it that way. So sometimes telling stories is a way of stepping back a little bit and getting a better sense of what's actually confronting us that's difficult. And stories, too, are a common ground in many ways. I'll show you some science here in a second. But also I wanted to mention, too, that stories have a way of pulling you in. Oftentimes when we want to change the behavior of a community, or even our own behavior, we push, right? Shoulds, oughts, we have to do it this way, we have to oppose this, we have to get this kind of activism going. And that has its place. But for stubborn people like me, it's more appealing to show me how it could be, how things actually could look if we did it right. And then I'm on board, right? I went to Sunday school until I went to college. I had all kinds of training, as some of you probably did, in what we shouldn't do and what's bad and sinful or whatever it is, right? And so a lot of us have this instinctive opposition to being told what to do, whether we have that kind of background or not. But when you tell a story, including a story of a possible future where we can all belong, there's something compelling about that that moves people forward in a way that shoulds and oughts don't. So here's a little bit of that science I mentioned. Stories are great for memory. Oftentimes, it's the anecdotes that we remember. When we hear a lecture, when we hear a debate, whatever it is. They create empathy. Thinking of PJ Manny, she has a group in Facebook called The New Mythos. She's a best-selling science fiction author, and she likes to call storytelling an empathy engine, which is nice. I think that's right. And brain behavior in different people who see the same movie tends to synchronize, so they're wonderful that way. I mentioned the other one earlier. We tend to be characters to ourselves in our own life story, however we understand that. And also, this tends to work across languages and cultural barriers, as this indicates up here. If you want to know more about this, by the way, so email me or just get a hold of me, and I'll send you this slideshow. I've put more text on these slides than I usually do, and if my students did that, I'd get after them. But the reason I did that is I want you to have this afterwards. So now, in terms of stories, the ones that interest me, maybe even more than myth, are the ones we tell ourselves, not only personally, but also collectively. The stories by which we make sense of who we are, what we're doing, in this conference context, what our leadership role is, how we do leadership, things like that. And one of the ways you know a story isn't working is you start seeing not just breakdowns, but absurdities. And I'm drawing a little bit on my family systems training here. My teachers always told me, look for the interactions in families that are not only undesirable, but they happen every single time, right? So Thanksgiving's a big trigger holiday for a lot of people. Well, actually, I shouldn't ask you, that's personal, but but I will say it is, or it was in my family, and that was the rowdy holiday where everybody fought at the table, and my mom tried to be the peacemaker, and my dad was my dad, and you know. So at a family systems level, when you have interactions like that they keep recurring but nobody's happy, they indicate a problem. They indicate a stuck story. In this case, the family story, and it's not spoken outward. It's outwardly. It's unarticulated, but it's potent. And sometimes the stories that aren't told are the powerful ones. So of these silly images I put up here, all of which indicate some kind of a cultural breakdown, my favorite at the moment is open box before eating pizza. I can't tell you how many pieces of cardboard I picked out of my teeth over the years trying to get to the pepperoni before I finally read that and went, oh, that's how you do it. So on a bit of a more serious note here, so I think a lot of us have heard about the disaster that happened last year. We lost a submersible called Titan. So I wanted to bring this up as kind of an extreme example of when a collective story goes wrong. But I wanted to bring in myth, too, to show you how this looks through a mythic lens. So, and this, by the way, is not about things we should or shouldn't have done or who's to blame or any of that. I'm looking at this as a cultural issue, right, and a mythological one as well. So on one level, the eerie, and people have written about this, including me, the eerie coincidences of the loss of these two vessels. So all kinds of safety issues. People in the Titan, in the submersible, warned in advance, we've got the hull might have problems, we need to test it more. No. There were people at the last minute, in both cases, who just had this funny feeling that they couldn't name, that maybe I shouldn't be on this trip. And they lived, right? So that happened both times. Risking passengers in an experimental voyage is the same in both cases. So that's one level of it. Normally, we dismiss this as coincidence. That's our rational kind of head way of thinking about this. It's a coincidence. And maybe it is. But if we look at it through the lens of myth, it starts to acquire maybe a different, flavor or dimension or something like that. And so the particular myth I'm thinking about involves two races of gods. The first are the Titans. So the Titans are the old race of gods. They are the ones that have been around for a while and their time is kind of up. So they are replaced by the Olympians. And I think it's important to remember, too, that the Olympians, so that's Zeus and Hera and Athena and all of them, they were blessed by Gaia. So they had the buy-in of Earth, if you want to think of it that way. So the Olympians are the newer race of gods. The old ones didn't go quietly. And one other thing to think about the Titans is that they were gigantic beings, huge inflated beings, right, who were very sure of themselves. So there was a battle both in heaven and on earth. The Olympians won. And the Titans, when they lost, most of them were locked up in boxes in the deepest part of the Greek underworld, which in our world is exactly where these two vessels, both named after Titans, ended up. So this is what I mean by a mythic story that replays. And I think this is one of the relevances of myth and of mythic motifs and characters. They don't stay in the myth books. They recur in tragic events. They show up in our dreams. They happen in interactions between all of us. There's corporate myths. There's myths in the school that I work in, all the schools I've worked in. They're all over the place. There's something called personal myths, too, that I won't go into now, but I'll say something about it at the very end, though. So the lesson that could be learned from this, well, there's many different ones, but I always kind of sum it up as pride goeth before a fall, right? If we're in too much of a hurry and not willing to slow down and actually reflect on what we're doing, it can be disastrous. And then the myth replays itself in its most literal form. But the other side of the story, where things went right, is that the Titanic had a sister ship, and that would be the Olympic. So the Olympic designers learned some lessons from what happened to the other ship. And they added lifeboats, they built up bulkheads, they did all kinds of work. And some of that, interestingly, started even before the Titanic disaster. If I remember correctly, the Olympic's actually the older ship. So nothing happened to that one, except it had a crash at one point, I forget the year, and it caved in part of the bow, but there was no loss of life. The ship was able to get back to port, and it was repaired, and then it had a career after that. So interesting difference. Here's an open question. What would happen if we knew enough mythology to ask how this comes into the world of finance? Because it's full of mythic images, right? We have the invisible hand. That one's been around for a while. We have witching hours, unicorns, castles in the air, angel investors, bulls and bears. There's all this mythological language in business. I don't know what that means, but it could indicate some interesting collective psychology that's at work. So that would be something to explore, I think. I wrote a book called Myths Among Us because I needed something for my graduate students beyond what I was already giving them that involved myths from many different cultures rather than just the Greeks and Romans. So there's something in there about this. But that's one that's a question for me. Like, what does that mean, you know? And if we think of myth as collective psychology, you know, what's the enchantment? What's the magic? What's even the spiritual force in finance that perhaps we're not fully conscious of? I don't know. There's myths in technology. That figure sitting on the cloud up there always reminds me of when I transitioned to Apple some years ago. I was running my own little micro-publishing business, and I was using Microsoft for a while, and it kept crashing on my publishing program. So I went, I've had enough of this blue screen of death stuff. So I went to the Apple store, and I felt like I was walking into a spaceship. It was kind of cool. And so at one point, this was years and years ago, I asked, well, what about things like antivirus software and all that, you know? And the salesperson in the store said, oh, you don't have to worry about that. And he actually did this. He said, it's all in the cloud. And he went, and seeing this, I looked up. I was like, I don't know what I expected to see, but very mythic. Another piece to this is artificial intelligence there at the bottom. There's stories about autonomous beings, if I can speak properly, that go back to ancient Egypt. And all in many different cultures. There's a great series of stories about the golem from Jewish mythology. There are these powerful beings that magical rabbis could create, but the thing about a golem is it does exactly what it's told. So there's these kind of humorous stories where a rabbi creates a golem and says, go do this, and it does it exactly like it's told, right? So that's a powerful algorithm. So let's switch a little bit and talk about this term I came up with. And the reason I have a picture of Sherlock Holmes up there is that he sort of inspired it. I got in some trouble when I was younger and set my high school on fire. And then I'm adopted, and I met my birth father years later, and he said, what kind of trouble did you get into? And I told him. And he goes, yeah, our ancestors burned Rome to the ground. I was like, that's way more intense than my school. So I was in a fight with this bully. I knocked him out at lunchtime, and then I lit his locker on fire, and it spread a little bit along one wall. But fortunately, they put it out in time, so instead of going to jail, I just went to continuation school, which was kind of fun, actually. And I did the lessons in advance, and I spent most of the semester reading Sherlock Holmes stories for the very first time. And the part that's kind of stayed with me is when he and Watson first meet, and Watson's trying to figure out what Holmes does for a living, and Holmes finally tells him, and he goes, I'm a consulting detective. And Watson says, what in the world is that? And he says, well, I have some knowledge that I've accumulated about how crime works and who commits it. And what I do is, here at 221B Baker Street, specialists and Scotland Yard and people like that visit me, they consult me, I get my fee, and then I solve the case, right? And every now and then I have to go out and actually look at things and, you know, with the magnifying glass and all that. But usually I can just do it based on knowing how all this works, right? And I thought, what a cool job that would be. So years later, when I was trying to think, you know, am I primarily a depth psychologist or an eco-psychologist? I have an ecological background as well. What is it I should think of myself as? And this is the word that came up. Because whatever kind of work I do, at school, in the corporate world as a consultant, whatever it is, it always has to do with this, exploring what I call keystone stories. So just as in ecology, there are keystone species. We were hearing about wolves on our tour that some of the presenters took a few days ago. When you remove a keystone species, it affects everything in the ecosystem, even the land itself. And in the same way, there are certain powerful stories that we tell ourselves that influence our values, our goals, how we see things, how we view ourselves, our leadership style, and what have you. So I like to work with those stories. I look for where they're stuck, and it's not just a matter of substituting a new story for an old one, because, you know, as irritating people like Freud pointed out, when you try to do that, the old story tends to come with you. You know, how many times, well, actually, I'm remembering a client that I had one time during my psychotherapy days who, she kept getting into relationships with the same awful dynamic in it. And then she came in once and just frustrated, and she said, you know what, this guy I'm with right now is more controlling than the last one. I'm regressing. And I said, no, you're getting ready to stop this. That relationship that you're in right now is like a funhouse mirror. It's showing you what the problem is in gigantic dimensions. It means you're getting ready to get beyond this, right? So I like doing that kind of work. I don't do therapy anymore, but I do work with some individuals. There's a colonel right now who's working on her dissertation. It's a fascinating topic. It has to do with the psychology of money. And specifically, why is it that healers, including psychotherapists, have such a hard time talking about money with their clients, and how can we get past this? So it's not just dumping the old story out of the air and hoping it's not going to show up again, which it does, but it's more about honoring what the old story did for us while it was still necessary, and then being able to move beyond it into either a wider version of the old story, or then, at that point, into a newer one. So at work, these are some of the questions I ask at work or around the issue of work. What life cycle transition is at hand? I think businesses of any size go through something similar to what individuals and families go through. I'm so grateful for my family therapy training, even though I don't do family therapy anymore. We talked about the family life cycle and how there are certain key events like people dying in the family, people being born in the family, kids moving out, stuff like that. And they work like developmental stages in the lives of individuals. So likewise, businesses do that. When you're new, that's one phase. When you get a firm sense of what your mission and vision and purpose are, that's another phase, and so on. When you change your operation, thinking of Ray Anderson and Interface. So he made the first modular carpets and did well at it. And then in 1995, he decided that he needed the operation to be fully sustainable. So he retooled everything, he and his team. And I think over a 12-year stretch, if I remember his TED Talk correctly, by doing that, by actually becoming out in the open with his idealism and wanting to protect the planet, I think he said his sales increased 2/3, and what was the other number? Profit doubled over a 12-year period, something like that. So that leads us to the next one. What paradigm, what story needs to shift? Because these keystone stories, or myths if we want to put it that way, are like miniature worldviews. So if we're stuck in seeing what we're doing in one way, how can we shift that? What needs to shift? How might the system resist change? That's a whole other presentation. And some of us have run into this already. How has the old one served us, and how can we reimagine the new one? So let's have some specific examples. So for a while, I was the chair of East-West Psychology at the California Institute of Integral Studies. And the program, roughly 45 to 50 years ago, it got going because there was a group of Western psychologists who were talking to people who had participated in wisdom traditions and practices from India. And they thought, wouldn't it be neat if we built a program around this conversation so that you could learn things like mindfulness meditation, and this is 40 to 50 years ago. You could learn all these great things that come out of those traditions, those ancient traditions from India, yoga and other things, and then put them into conversation with psychology and see what kinds of new knowledge and practice come out of that. So I asked the people in my program if we were really stepping up to this mission anymore, because we had a group of, I think it was 6 core faculty, all white, nobody who had spent, well, there were a few people who had spent some time in India, but it's, on the one hand, there's the name and the image, East-West psychology, and then there's us, right? So it's like, this feels kind of funny, you know? So where do we want to go with that? So an obvious consideration would be, let's hire more faculty of color and with different experience from ours. But there was a lot of resistance to that. There were 2 faculty in particular who had been in the program for decades, and they didn't like this idea. So I asked everybody to imagine what kind of an image, what kind of an archetype really kind of sums up our program. You know, if you think of our program that way, what is it? And so one of the ones that kept coming up over and over, even in people's dreams, was a bridge. And so I said, okay, that's what we were. But in terms of where we need to go and what we need to do, what do we want to be? And we had been adding other wisdom tradition teachings from different cultures, so it wasn't just Southeast Asia anymore. We were adding, we also added eco-psychology. I brought that piece, other disciplines, other practices and knowledge areas, and we decided, well, not decided, we kind of discovered at one point that we were actually more like a hub, connecting all these different knowledge and practice areas. So knowing how this felt, and we could feel the change of images, helped us move things forward. So if you look us up now, what you'll see is that the department is now led by a man who grew up in India. We have core faculty, I shouldn't say we because I don't work there anymore, but there's on the core faculty is a woman who's a Chinese scholar who grew up in China. There's a man from South America who's an expert on eco-psychology. There's all kinds of plurality and diversity and different voices that weren't there before. And the program's the better for it. The students love it. Their enrollment's really high compared to what it used to be. So that might be one example of using this to make a little bit of change at work. I should mention too, in terms of management styles, when I think about what I mentioned earlier in terms of top-down heroic management, so some of these huge figures, Hercules, Kronos is, he's Saturn. He's famous for being kind of a distant father figure who one day started eating some of the other gods who were his children. So, I mean, how many people have worked in a place where it seems like the higher-ups are eating everybody? They're eating, well, there's at least one hand. I know I have. You know, they're eating the vitality, the ideas. Yeah, raise your hand if you know this, you know. Right? It's horrible. So you walk out of the place at the end of the day, and you have, you know, half the energy is when you walked in, right? So those are not leadership styles to recommend. But there's so many different examples. There's tricksters. There's people who lead from that position. There's people who are more nurturing, more like Gaia, for instance, and that's their leadership style. That's where they're comfortable. Lots of possibilities. There's a wonderful magician who's one of my favorite hero alternatives. He appears in Welsh and Irish myth. The Welsh call him Manawydan, and he has a heroic friend who continually gets into trouble because he's impulsive, like a lot of hero figures are in myth. And Manawydan solves problems by being patient, reflective, and looking under the hood at what's going on to see what it actually means. So he's a good model for some of us. There's a career change I wanted to mention. I've actually lumped a bunch of these together. There have been people I've worked with over the years who weren't happy with what they were doing, and they got more in touch with the mythic roots. One said, we talked about Hera a little bit, she tends to be kind of a fierce mother, or a dark mother figure, very controlling, right? I have to know exactly what's going on. And I'm thinking of someone in particular who held that position in a group and just was unhappy with her job. And so she ended up going somewhere else but doing similar job responsibilities. She was a marketer, but she did it in a much lighter way, and that was more nurturing, much more like Gaia, and she was much happier with that too. So in terms of authenticity, a question to ask is, from a mythic standpoint, when I think about the characters of myth I know about, or even when I read fiction, who appeals to me? Who can I resonate with emotionally? So in public, there's a term that you might want to look up. Enchantivism is not an alternative to activism, but enchantivism has to do with telling stories that are bigger than the ruptures that cause them. Stories about how we could be together, how things could be, right? So I think of examples, for instance, like Nichelle Nichols showing up in, I'll use the Star Trek since we're on that track a little bit, showing up in the 60s in that TV show and getting to the point where she was going to quit because they didn't do anything with her. She was just opening and closing the hailing frequencies. And then Martin Luther King had a conversation with her and said, we need visions of black people on the bridge of that ship in the future. You have to stay there. And she did. And she did more with the part as well. So that would be an example of enchantivism, leading through enchantment and inspiration. So this is the last piece. Let's see, I'm looking at the time here. The last piece I wanted to get into, let's see here. So when you think about when you felt enchanted and in awe, for some of us, these are rare occasions, but when you look across cultures, for a lot of people, they're actually normal. They're actually a state that people go in and out of sometimes daily. Enchantment is a sign, therefore, of being well, being integrated, being healthy. And I'm thinking, too, of Kennedy, right? We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do these other things, not because they're easy, but because they're hard. Enchantment is an enormous motivator. And to say enchant, actually, if you look at the etymology of that, it means to be inside a song. So I have a little picture down there of a guy diving out of the sky. That was, I always get the date wrong. I think it's March 20, 1961, cover of Sports Illustrated. That's my birth father. And reminding me of Icarus, the guy with wings. He came to a better end, actually, but so because he loved what he did. My father was a Marine. And when that ended, he thought, what can I do for a living? And then he kept jumping out of the sky, and then he taught other people how to do it. He was also an inter-island pilot in Hawaii, so he found his bliss. So I wanted to address this too. Let me check in. Let's see. I want to go over a couple of minutes just because we started a couple of minutes late. Is that okay? Okay. I promise I'll wrap it up pretty quick here. So I played around with Maslow's pyramid a little because I wanted to give it kind of an ecological slant. But in terms of this question, right, this is really important. Yes, of course you have to make payroll. You have to get the stuff done that needs to get done. No question about it. But that second bullet, to make space for my own re-inspiration. The thing about inspiration, if we call it that rather than enchantment, is that it's contagious. It tends to spread. I discovered about myself years ago that I'm actually really good at kind of selling the programs that I'm in, that I teach in, that I direct, just by talking about why I love to teach what I teach. Who knew? So when we do that, we draw people in. As leaders, we get people to follow us. And the question came up earlier about how do you make people follow you, and of course you can't, but you can inspire them to. But to do that, you have to be in your own inspiration. So one solid suggestion I would make is that if you haven't been inspired for a while by what you're doing, maybe it's time to regroup and look for the inspiration. And if it's not there, then you have decisions to make, right? The term heartsteading is one that I've taught my students. It has to do with bringing the right people together to solve difficult problems. I have a lot of faith in people's ability to do that. If you've got the right people in the room who care about the problem, they'll figure it out. And I'll have more to say about that in a moment. I also wanted to mention, too, that the pyramid was inspired by Abraham Maslow's field work among the Blackfoot Indians. And in their way of holding this, personal and community actualization, meeting communal needs, and wisdom gathering, and also the practical on-the-ground work tend to go together instead of being separated. So a couple of quotations for you here. The first one is from a poet who is also an aviator and a war hero. Building a boat isn't about weaving canvas, forging nails, or reading the sky. It's about giving a shared taste for the sea. If you can do that, the rest will follow. And I do this at work. I've seen it happen in many different settings. If you can stay in your inspiration and coordinate other people's and help them articulate it, they'll figure out the details. And the second one, not authority, but aspiration, is the motivator, the builder and transformer of civilization. And that's Joseph Campbell. I'm not going to go through this right now, but it's some of the science on imagination. And again, you can have a copy of this slide if you want to see this. But what all these amount to is that imagination not only involves a lot of the brain, but it really comes online when we're working toward the future rather than staying stuck in the past. And here's another piece that I can't go into right now, but I did a little etymology, since that's what I like to do, on the name of this place. So if you look up John in a baby name dictionary, it'll usually say God is gracious, which is one layer. If you look a little deeper, though, there's a god called Oannes, an ancient Mesopotamian god. He looks like kind of a combination of a fish and a person. And he's actually a teacher of the arts of civilization, which I think is a little bit of what we're trying to do here with leadership. And then valleys, of course, are great places to go deep and to reflect. And snake, a great figure in many different mythologies of difficult transformation. So maybe those apply in terms of looking at this place through a mythic lens. Ecotherapy is part of one of the hats that I wear, and one of the powers, I think, of being an enchanted leader, getting people outside a bit instead of sitting in rooms all day. There's research on this that I can make available to you, but the gist of it is, even when we reconnect a little bit, it makes a huge difference to our health, our happiness, our sense of joy. There's people who do this to get over all kinds of, for instance, post-traumatic stress, assault victims. It's magical the degree to which nature connection can heal. And I think that's so important for this place in particular. So here's a loaded question. Which worldview? And this is the last thing I'll say is, this is a takeaway here. Leaders that can help us, this is what we need, to imagine not just what is, but how things could be. Because that's the pull. That's where the magic and the inspiration are. And people will topple empires or build them. They will redesign religions or found them. Businesses are founded on this. Just about everything in human affairs that counts comes back to somebody's fantasy about, wouldn't it be neat if this existed? All of these, by the way, are examples of fictional books that translate into real-world actions. So that one on the bottom, for instance, is a scene from Hunger Games. Thai activists are using the three-finger salute symbol out in the streets. Black Beauty changed the conditions of taxi drivers in London. So this is where fiction or fantasy change reality. Thank you. So at this point, I would like to ask Kelly Jones and William Morrow to come up so we can do our panel. So, can you hear me? Yeah. All right.
Hello, can you hear me? Oh, there I am.
All right,
Hello.
good. Thank you for being here. This is exciting. I've been looking forward to this a lot. I want to ask both of you to start by introducing yourselves and also talking about what you do locally here.
Ladies first.
Yep.
My name's Kelly Jones, and I'm the founder of No So Patches. My company repairs and extends the life of gear by using these little repair patches to add flair or repair your backpacks, your sleeping bags, your tents, anything that you rip it up out in the outdoors with. So that's what I do. And in the community, I'm on the board of Silicon Couloir, and I've also volunteered at the Animal Adoption Center and Habitat for Humanity. So, yeah.
As I recall, you also have a past as a therapist, I think, and an accountant.
Yes, so I have a lot of tricks up these sleeves. I am an accountant and a therapist, so my background is in recreational therapy and art therapy, dance therapy, horticulture, and I used that for like 7 years. I worked at the counseling center and Teton County School District and at Van Fleck House. So, yeah, I did that with adults in long-term care and children with special needs. And then I was hustling on all these different grants and trying to make it work here in the Valley, like all of us do, working a few different jobs, and started to work in a private family office as the admin, and worked my way up to the lead accountant, and worked as an accountant in various different industries, from biotechnology all the way to production accounting. So I did documentary film accounting, so yeah. And then I worked in a public firm with a couple of CPAs. So yes, I use my left and my right brain all the time.
We just went and got Wonder Woman, right? We were like, can you come and
I'm Pallas Athena.
That's good. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Will Morrow. I'm the CFO of Vertical Harvest. I hope all of you know who we are. We produce some amazing leafy greens here in the Valley. I've been out here since around 2002 when I came as a refugee from New York City, having completely burnt out of Wall Street. I spent about 5 years in China during these periods, but I kept coming back to Jackson, usually because I was chasing a future wife, who is now my wife, which is great. But I've started several businesses here, including an oilfield services company focused on traditional oil sectors and making it greener. As well as Melvin Brewing. Jeremy Tofty, who was the original founder of that in the back of Tie Me Up, began making some incredible beer and wanting to share it with the world, and he needed a plan and a capital structure that would allow him to build the facility we built down in Alpine back in 2013, and we grew that to hopefully a pretty beloved brand here in Jackson, and making some great beer and some great friends along the way. And I've recently had the chance to transition over to Vertical Harvest, where we're doing some fantastic things.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Kelly, if we start with you, and I think you brought some video. So
I did, yeah. Sandy asked me to put a video together, and
right.
Here it is.
All right.
Hi, I'm Kelly. I live in a mountain town, and I needed an easy-to-use repair solution to fix all the holes and tears in my gear. I wanted something unique and fun, and couldn't find it, so I made No-So fabric patches in bright colors and cool shapes, with a tough, permanent adhesive to fix my gear.
we start with you, Kelly, for questions? I
Okay,
wrote a
doke.
few down here in this little thing we all got. The prompting event for NOSO, could you tell us a little bit about that story?
Yes, I was hunting in the backcountry, and I tore my Patagonia Fitzroy jacket on barbed wire. And everyone in mountain towns uses duct tape or electrical tape or scotch tape to repair their gear. And I thought there had to be a more beautiful way. I am a stylish person, and I didn't want to put tape on my jacket. So I started researching different adhesives and fabrics in my garage, and I came up with a really good combination that stuck better than anything on the market. And my first designs were just like little hearts and diamonds and stars that I would wear in the Jackson Hole Mountain Resort tram line, and people would ask me to make them one. So I would cut these patches with my X-Acto knife on my cutting board at home, and I kind of realized, whoa, like so many people want these. I'm gonna make this into a business. So we launched on Kickstarter, and we raised about $15,000 or $20,000 to go into production. And in the first year, we were door to door in all REI stores. So it was a lot of fast growth, and it's been a fun company. But yeah, I needed a repair solution from just me, and I wanted it to be cute. And everyone else liked them too, so.
One of the things I admire about what you did, among many things, is it's so easy to get into a situation where you're frustrated and just solve it in any way that you can and say, well, this is a pain, and just complain about it and go into all that. But you alchemized it. You know what I mean? It's like you use that as an opportunity to bring something new into the world. And I was just wondering how conscious you were of doing that while you were doing it, or?
I don't think I was really conscious of it. This idea came to me in a dream, so I get a lot of my best ideas right before I fall asleep. And yeah, I just had like a piece of duct tape on my jacket, and I was like, I just want something more beautiful. And yeah, I don't know. The first product that we launched was called Puffy Patches, and we had to change, like it was no-so Puffy Patches, but we had to change back to just no-so because people thought that the puffy patches puffed up like popcorn or puffy paint. So that was a little confusing in the beginning, but yeah, a lot. But, I don't think I was really that conscious of what I was doing. I just was like feeling it in my gut, and I said, if I can make this like a fun solution for other people, maybe more people would keep their items in use, because tape was ugly. And now if you look at it, like if you just walk out at the ski resort, or I'll be at like the hill climb here, and there's like so many people wearing my patches, and it's like, whoa, there's a lot of like beautiful art out there now.
Yeah,
So,
there is.
yeah.
I see them all over the place now.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about, so there's these two mentalities that we wrestle with. There's this throwaway mentality, and it's not working for me, out with it, and I'll just get something new when we can afford to, Or the other mentality is more of let's repair it. Let's do something different with it. And I'm not sure I'm phrasing this right, but can you say something more about like what the underlying story of that means to you? Does that make sense? Or
Yeah, so I think like every hole or snag, rip or tear has a story to tell, right? And so I like to say, like when I see a patch out there that's like an eco badge of honor, this person that has chosen to wear these patches on their sleeve, right? It's like they want to, activate themselves and like help us reach a critical mass. I mean, you looked at the stats up there. There's, people are like 72 pounds of textile waste a year, and so, I think. Yeah, every patch has a story, and oftentimes I'll be at a trade show, and people are coming over to the booth, and I feel sort of like a gear therapist, where people are telling, I need to get like a Chase lounge and like dress up and take notes. But people will tell me like how they got this hole or what they did, to their pants, and I'm like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for sharing. That's like the 10,000th story I've heard. So Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But so repairing instead of replacing, a lot of the synthetic gear, it takes like 200 to 210 years for, a backpack or a sleeping bag or a ski kit to biodegrade. And if you can keep it in use as long as possible, that's where you're going to have an impact. So, yeah. And I can go into like circular design and like the circular economy and like trying to keep everything going for as long as possible. But is that a good answer?
That was great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Other thing I wanted to ask you too, that was a good segue to this. So there's a phrase that you use in interviews that I really like, patch the planet, right?
Yes, I love patching the planet.
Yeah.
We just got back from the Great American Beer Festival in Denver, and we were patching the planet with all these beer drinkers. But I had 3 sales reps with me, and all these guys, they rip it up outside, and after they're done with a nice bike ride or, skiing, they're going to go drink a beer. So it was like, oh, these are our people. But yeah, patching the planet, we always say that. But patching the planet doesn't have to be literally like repairing your gear. It can also be like being a nice person in the grocery store line, or, random acts of kindness, whether that's, babysitting for your friend, or going for, like, volunteering at your favorite organization, or, donating to your favorite cause. Those are other ways that you can patch the planet.
Yeah.
And I lead with empathy and kindness, and I look for that in my people during the hiring process, or like, how do you patch the planet in your community? What do you do, right? So, yeah, there's a lot of different ways. You don't have to be so literal with it, but yeah.
Yeah.
You create your own personal reality with every choice that you make, and focus on the positive things, and
Oh, wow. I love that.
vibrate at a higher frequency. So, yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
So, Will, I wanted to ask you a question. In terms of what you do, I mean, you have a record that if we listed it, it would be longer than my arm. And a lot of it is there's the whole financial analysis and planning piece that you've done. You're an expert on operations at different levels and managing operations, and also your background in corporate organization and all that. It takes so much, obviously, mental skill to do all that. But in terms of, and I'm thinking about what Betsy was saying earlier about head and heart, where for you does the heart dimension come into this kind of leadership work?
I want to start with a little bit about what Vertical Harvest does.
Yeah.
We are community builders and labor empowerers. That's what this business does. And to do that, we sell leafy greens by building large infrastructure projects in cities like Westbrook, Maine, Detroit, Michigan, and a number of other cities that we have in our pipeline right now. And then we go out into these communities and we bring in some of the most disenfranchised members of those communities, people with disabilities who are not given opportunities to work in jobs that they're so capable of doing and ready to be managers and leaders themselves. And we've given them that opportunity at this business to really allow them to shine and do great things. It's the vision of our founder. She's done some amazing things. She's an amazing person. And between Carolyn and Nona, we are very, very blessed to have a great vision. When you talk about measurement, I come from a background of, it's a lot of numbers, K1s, S1s, what's a business look like, what's your yield, how does it work? And I have a million ways to measure businesses depending on what the business is and what it wants to accomplish, both on a backwards looking and forwards looking basis and how we're looking. But from day one, I'm dealing with bond issuances and different things going on at Vertical Harvest, but I've had people in the background saying, what about B Corp? What about beneficial corporate certification? What are we doing about that? And so I've had to learn quite a bit about the process of measuring your impact, measuring what we're trying to do. Because we're not just making leafy greens. We're empowering people. We are rebuilding communities, and we're focused on doing these things, and it doesn't lend itself to a return on invested assets. It doesn't lend itself to an EBITDA ratio. There's a lot of other things that need to go into this. So as we're building this company, we have teams that are really looking at these pieces, going after these certifications, and holding us accountable to make sure that we're achieving our larger mission.
That's a great lead to the second question I wanted to ask you, which is, so I know from your background you've been involved both in startups but also in long-term businesses. What would you say that some of both the challenges and the opportunities are for either, especially the ones that are so determined on making a difference in the world?
So this is a great question, because I think I've had to go through a journey as I've gone from what I did before, which was small cap private equity. So businesses that had money, were generating capital, and were able to, but wanted to grow, and so they're going to go through a period where they're going to be cash poor and need investment, to kind of a mission-driven, vision-driven business. And those businesses, a lot of times it takes a while to build that cash flow up. And it's, it might never happen. It might be an IP business. It might be something that you have a vision for something and you want to go manifest it. And you got to go have other people share in that vision of what that is so they can help support it as you bring it to market. Did that get there?
Yeah, thank you. And another question for you would be, it's kind of a big question, but maybe the shorter version. How has your leadership style, considering everything that we've just talked about, how has that evolved over the years? What would be some of the high points?
So this goes back to something we talked about earlier today about making mistakes.
Yeah.
And especially at this summit, I get to get pretty humble and realize some of the really big mistakes I've made, and I've made a lot of them. We're all evolving all the time, but I think my background is putting emphasis on the numbers and not putting enough emphasis on the people, and not going after those hearts and minds, and not doing the red circle that Betsy showed us earlier, and spending that time in the empathy and kind of getting to know people. Because while I always have the best intention for all of my employees and everything that we're working on at heart, sometimes I feel like I need to do so much to communicate the financial value that I don't spend enough time learning about what my human values are and the human values of the people that I work with and what's really going to drive them. And you're not going to get the best out of that human asset unless they become human and not just an asset.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah. And one more question for Kelly before we open this up to everybody. So your own version of this, how has your leadership evolved?
Well, as a therapist and an accountant, you're always working independently. So I'm reconciling accounts, and I have a lot of intrinsic motivation. You're just always, I want to get outside, right? I want to get outside again. I want to get this done. And then when I was working with people, I'm always trying to problem solve, how can I get this social emotional goal met, right? So you're always focused on these goals. But as a, founder of a manufacturing company, my leadership has switched. I think leadership's a vibe. So I'm always, when I'm interviewing new staff, I'm looking for people that are going to bring out the best in me, and I want to bring out the best in them. So I want to strive forward. So I'm some of the questions that we'll ask will be how are you going to add value to our company, right? I'm going to do a lot for you. What are you going to do for us? I'm looking for those DIY activists that are just really excited about our mission, which is to imagine a world without waste. And so, just this weekend, I have 2 junior sales reps, and they're young. They're 24 years old. And then I had this senior sales rep. His name's Koji. And, we're at this beer fest, so there's a lot of drunk people, right? So, but they patch their stuff too. So it's a new market that we're kind of breaking into. And
People that fall down.
There it is.
Yes. People that rip it up. But we could tell that Koji and I were just like, oh gosh, like what's going on with these chicks? They look nervous. So the next, so that was Thursday, and then Friday we just had we brought them down to the lobby at the Hyatt, and we're like, okay, ladies, this is what we're doing, right? We're patching the planet. Do you really want this? Do you want to be here? And the two girls were awesome. They're like, God, you guys sound like a TED Talk, And we're like, well, just talk to them about anything. Talk to them about and one of the things I do at trade shows is I'll say hey, do you have a hole? And we say hey, do you have a snag? And then you kind of trying to bring someone in to the fun that you're having at a show so that activates them and they're like, oh, what's going on over here? But, anyway, so yeah, I try to I want people to make me better and I want to make them better. So yeah, I always say we're trying to build the dream team. Who's going to be my Scottie Pippen? Who's going to be my Dennis Rodman? I might be Dennis Rodman.
Yep.
Maybe. I don't know if I'm Michael Jordan, but so yeah, and having fun. I've always been drawn to the fun. I was a clown with Dr. Patch Adams in pediatric.
No kidding.
Yeah, in pediatric oncology units, and you're always just trying to uplift other people. What can you do to inspire them to make change? I say, I am the change that I want to see in the world, and what do you want, right? So, anyways, there's a lot of professional development and coaching that I do now, whereas I mean, it's a little easier to be an accountant because you're just oh, I'm done. But as, this type of leader, it's a little different because I have a team of 24 now, right? And I need to make sure that they're all striving and, loving what they're doing too. So anyway.
Well, I think, do we have time for a couple of questions? Okay, good. Let's open it up. Questions for our panel. Anybody? The box is available. Down here. Oop.
Okay, so Will, you had your main job was come into businesses and help them get their numbers and get everything up and going. And with your new transition to vertical harvest, your assets are now people. What did you have to change in your own mindset to go from financial to working with people?
Well, I've always worked with people, so to be fair, I do get accused quite a lot of being kind of a one-man show, because I think there's a natural allergy to financial numbers for a lot of people, and then one of the things that I really like to do in my job is teach people how to use those things and realize it's not an allergy. It's just a lack of education because no one's ever given it to you. And it can be pretty simple, all the way down to the old shoebox method that my stepfather talks about. I've got this much money at the beginning of the year. I do this. Do I have more money in the box at the end of the year? That's a profit. And you break it down to something that's simple at some level. But more to your question about working with, vertical harvest has been an education in really working with a team. And we are a very team-based organization. We are highly, highly communicative, which has been something that a leader has to do, a manager has to do, and they're two different things. But both of them have to do it. And I've found that in a lot of my prior jobs, I've set it up as a silo. So all the information was kind of with me, and I could make most of the business decisions, and that doesn't lead to scale. That actually leads to problems. Really trying to empower our team to better understand financials and how that translates, how strategy translates as financials, and vice versa. So I'm trying to do that. I'm creating a program for some of our people right now to better learn financial projections and how you achieve them and what this means and how important it is. So really trying to communicate better. And then I think down the road, we'll be integrating more of the things we're doing outside of the pure accounting of it into our financial reporting for the B Corp purposes, and so that we're able to communicate how we're impacting lives and what kind of impact we have.
I think over here.
Hi, for both of you, when you think about measuring impact, so not the steps towards impact, like how many greens are you growing, or funds are you raising, or patches are you selling, but really ultimately what's the impact that you're having or hope to have with what your business is doing. So how are you thinking about that impact and measuring it and communicating it over time?
So at NOSO, we are looking at our ESG and trying to figure out, how to packet that and put it on our website and give like more transparency, not only with our human capital, but also okay, so one little patch, we've sent out 2.5 million, but I can't measure, I don't know, I think it's 2 yards of fabric for a backpack, 8 yards of fabric for a sleeping bag. I don't know, Noah knows more of this. I don't, or maybe you, yeah. All the different fabrics, so, we're reducing textile waste, keeping items in use. I don't know what people are using these on, so that's a really good question, how am I measuring impact? I think because we work with the North Face and Arc'teryx, and I know how many patches that they're buying, and we're working with their sustainability teams, CEOs, warranty and repair departments. I guess that's we have a survey on our website, tell us what you do with your patches, and we're collecting data there. But yeah, we're working on that and trying to hopefully provide the outdoor industry and the hunting and fishing, because we work in both, some of those metrics. So,
I have a colleague, Hannah, who leads our team periodically through something called the theory of change. And what that does is we're starting with the end in mind of what kind of change do we want to have. And this could be financial change, it could be impact, it could be something else. And then there's a couple steps as you move backwards to see what your inputs are. And then you look at each step. Is that input going to achieve my next step and my next step to get to my ultimate impact? And so we're going to be looking at those final impacts, and we're going to make a thesis that these inputs will lead us to that goal, and we'll be measuring that as we go.
I thought of one more thing. So we're working on this emissions project right now. With what I do with NOSO, people are sending their, big old sleeping bags back to the warranty and repair department to get fixed. I want to know what that carbon emission impact is, right? So I reached out to the Outdoor Industry Association to try to find some of this data, and it's behind a paywall, so you're just I'm working with a sustainability consultant to try to find this data to say, okay, if you send your jacket from, Jacksonville, Florida, all the way back to Reno to get that fixed, and then they send that jacket all the way back to Jacksonville, what's that impact look like? Why not just send out this little dead stock fabric patch that, we've upcycled? Sometimes we're taking manufacturers' dead stock fabric, so that's the fabric that they can't use after their production run. They'll have yards and yards of this on these bolts. And so we'll just take that and then convert that into fabric or patches that they can either give as a gift with purchase, or I want people to bundle patches with their gear, so at the point of purchase people are getting that option. Here's the solution, don't all that carbon emissions, I don't know, I'd stay up at night. I was telling Will last night, I dream of all this fabric falling, into this big old landfill pile, and that's what keeps me up at night. So trying to figure out a way to change consumer behavior, and measuring that is, part of the goal of the business, but yeah.
One of the best descriptions of scope 1 through 3 circularity that I've ever heard.
Oh, good. I hope you guys got that on video. Well, yeah, and like designing from a place of circularity, that's what we're doing with all of the manufacturers that we work with. Thinking about, that cradle to cradle philosophy, like, okay, so I have a backpack with these buckles and zippers and whatever else doodads are on it, right? Like, is that fabric Blue Sign certified? Is it as eco as we can make it? What's gonna happen to those little buckles? What's gonna happen to that zipper? I think about that all the time because I don't know, I care, so, yeah. And I think that we're inspiring change makers from within these huge companies. like when the North Face emailed, there was seriously like 32 people on this email because you've got like the marketing, the warranty, CEO, and I have like 7 people, and I was like, okay, everyone, we're gonna like look bigger than we really are. Everyone's going on this email. Look like you matter, right? Like, say cool things. But they had this, that was 2 years ago, they had this More Than a Jacket campaign that they, worked in collaboration with the San Francisco MoMA, and they had all these like awesome jackets on display in the museum, and NOSA was a part of that. But they bring their sustainable stories to us, and we try to help them like create the most, I guess, cool way of like telling that story, right? So anyway.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
One more. We have room for one more. Harry, you going?
Yep. May I?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. I've had the challenge and the pleasure of living abroad for the majority of my adult life. And what people from abroad see of America right now is, well, I don't have to tell all of you. And this is kind of America the Beautiful. Up there, and all the inspiration that's happening here. Have you ever, as leaders, thought about being the ambassador's story about America? Because the rest of the world really needs to hear what's happening here in America, here about America, because it only hears the bad.
That's a hard one. I guess I'll go. I don't like the limelight. I mean, I don't. I'm an introvert by nature.
Quick survey.
Yeah. No, but I think in my work, like, I'm being called to action, right? So I usually say no to a lot of stuff like this because I'm growing a company and I'm one person, and I think I have to be mindful of my own personal ecology, like where I give my energy, and be mindful of that. But yeah, I think I would do that. I mean, sign me up. I'm ready. Yeah, if it's about textile waste and keeping items in use, I love talking about that, and I love inspiring other people. I love trade shows, and yeah, I love people. So I think I can do it. Do you want to come with me? You want to join me? Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
Let's do this. Okay.
You can talk about leafy greens, and I'll talk.
Leafy greens.
Yeah, leafy greens, and I'll talk about textile waste.
I also had the opportunity to live abroad for a number of years in China and in other countries, Kazakhstan, the former Soviet Union as well. And I know what you mean, that the message, I was in China when we bombed the embassy in I can't remember the name of the country now, but years and years ago, we had a tactical strike, and there was riots in the street, and there was some bad things. There's a lot of negative impressions about America out there. I will say that my CEO was on the Clinton Global Initiative last week. She's earned our company's earned the Tony Hsieh Award for inclusivity in the workplace. And we are doing things as a company that are bigger. I think that people, I've been having this conversation a lot about how to change the minds of the people in power. And this is a great community, but the money is still sitting somewhere else with people making decisions that might not be in line with what we want. And in my experience, I feel like the next generation's got to save us, because people have to start voting with their dollars on how conscious they are on the companies they're buying things from. So I'm not going to buy a product from a company I don't respect anymore. I'm going to buy from a company that has that's associated with my values, and I think the values of the younger generations are more inclusive towards a better economic and a better environmental future. And I think that's what's probably going to save us overall. But it's when that's happening that the leaders from these companies can actually authentically go out there and saying, I'm being a leader in a good way. Because I don't know how someone who doesn't have that kind of power with them can make an impact. I mean, we heard some great stories about it today, quite frankly, about the salmon and about what one man was able to do in 1989 to save it. So yeah, one person can have an impact, but we need some really big change, and that has to come from some really big faces.
Well, I want to thank both of you for being here and sharing both your wisdom and so much on-the-ground practical advice, too. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys are awesome. Guys, all of these leaders, all of you, this is our unity. We're the Tetons. So, I'm going to take a quick vote because it's really beautiful outside. In the schedule, it says there's supposed to be a break. But wouldn't you rather just stay and then we finish and then you go outside and play? And if you really need to go run to the bathroom, you can do that. But we have a great Energizer bunny to kick it off. A couple things, like these whole myth ideas I got really into. And there's a couple books, they're a little dated, but they're fun if you want to remember all your Greek mythology and how it might relate to yourself or other people you know. There's a book called Gods Among Us and Goddesses Among Us. They both take place, they both use Greek mythology. So super fun to think about. Craig's book, Myths Among Us, is awesome. It's a bit of a tomb, but they're really fun to then connect back to what does that mean right now. And I think the more we can have bigger context to the stories, the more we can also potentially change the trajectory. And the last piece, that Will just talked about on, we're leaders with our pocketbook. That gets into those 35,000 decisions we make every day. And really being conscious of we are the leaders that can change the trajectory of what we support and what we don't. Because we really are America the Beautiful, and everybody here has inspired that in us. So, to all the major news outlets that I listen to way too much and get depressed, let's have a different story. Because we are the different story. And so now I just saw everybody run to the bathroom, so I'm wondering if I should tap dance for 2 minutes before we introduce Matthew. So let's take just a 1 minute, let's practice mindfulness, right? So if you want to stand up, we'll just let some people go to the bathroom and come back. Sorry. It's going to be the 2-minute break, not the 15. But just to, put your hands over your head and do that little arc, right? In Kiro Shaman, it's called, this is your Waracocha. It's our Waracocha. So if you need a little bit of an invisible force field around you, but this is your whole energy field, right? It's not just your being. So you can see it and then you can look over here and say, how do I want to be? Or look over here. Just get different perspectives. And just to take a breath in and feel your feet on the ground. This is where I stand. Feel you're the oak tree, right? This is where I stand. And breathe it in, and this is my crown, and you're also a spiritual being, no matter what your religious perspective, right? Let that light in from the sun, right? Let it flow into every angle. Get that energy. And then connect down into the earth. This is really all about power. How do we own that power that's in us? And I'm feeling really weird here because I don't want it to be a TED Talk. Anyway, okay. So, 3 weeks ago, fun little story. You want to stand up? That's good. Nick, who you heard earlier, he was sailing off Cape Cod in a place called Cuttyhunk. I used to live on Cape Cod, so I know it, and it's fun. And he calls me, because as I said, we knew each other. And he's like, hey, I was just sailing with this buddy of mine, and he just retired from running Ben & Jerry's. And by the way, he increased while I was there for 5 days, Ben & Jerry's, like 60% in 5 years. And still did all the great things that Ben & Jerry's stands for. And he's really psyched about what you guys are doing and what we're doing. And, you know, he said if there's any way he can help, he'd love to talk to you. Would you like to talk to him? I'm like, okay. And so a day or two later, I'm on the phone with Matthew McCarthy, like one of the nicest guys on the planet, and I'm a little intimidated. I'm like, really? And he's so kind. We had this great conversation, and he says, well, if there's anything I can do to help, I would love to be there. Right? And I'm like, well, we really don't have any money. Like, I spent it all. And he's like, that's okay, I'd really love to be there. Right? Thank you. So he changed his plans. And here he is in Jackson Hole. And in the last 3 days, we've had the pleasure of all connecting, as Betsy mentioned, to spend some time together. And, you meet those people every once in a while who've created great things wherever he's gone in his career. And when I was a kid, sorry to tell all these stories, but they come to me for different people. I was like 12 or 13, and I used to watch on Thursday nights. I think it was Thursday nights, but I'm not sure. When most of America watched similar shows, and you can still say when Happy Days was on and stuff. Anyway, it was a Sonny and Cher show, right? I used to love Sonny and Cher. And they did this vignette, as they did, about a poem. And it was the poem called If by Rudyard Kipling. And I'd never heard the poem before. And I so loved it, I went, and I still have the notebook with my curly Q, 12 or 13-year-old handwriting, where I went and found the poem and I wrote it down in the notebook. And if I had remembered, I would have brought it to show you, like, no joke. But the end of the poem is something like, oh my God, all of a sudden I'm spacing on the end of the poem. You can walk with kings, nor you lose the common touch. If you can walk with kings, nor lose the common touch, and you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything in it. And what's more, you'll be a man or a woman, my son. And when I meet Matthew, he walks with kind of the titans of industry, right? And if you met him anywhere, he can touch anyone immediately with his openness and his kindness. And those are the people that can change the world. So again, thank you so much for gracing Jackson Hole with your energy and your twinkle. And it's my pleasure to introduce Matthew McCarthy.
Do I cry now or do I cry later? How's everybody feeling? That's okay. How's everybody feeling? All right, we're going in the right direction. So I had just started Ben & Jerry's about 5 years ago, and we were getting ready to launch some new flavors. That's one of the most exciting parts of the year. We're getting ready to launch these flavors. We got a whole communication plan in place. And my job as kind of the CEO stiff is like, all right, we're going to put Matthew out and do some PR stuff, right? And usually business press. Like, I'll do consumer press, but I'm just not that interesting, honestly. The people who develop our flavors or our partners, that's where the fun, that's where the energy is. So I'm talking to my PR guy, Sean Greenwood, and he's like, all right, I got a great gig for you. We're going to go on Fox Business. I was like, oh yeah, okay, sounds great. And he goes, and by the way, it's live TV. And so I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds great. So basically we pack up all the ice cream, we go down to Manhattan. We're there in the studios right in Midtown, right? And how many people here have been on live TV? Yeah, it's terrifying. So, and I like to talk. I got kind of a big mouth. I'm very, get energy from other people. I'm really extroverted, but I was still freaking out. And it's one thing to do an interview with press where it's recorded or it's it's in the paper, or it's on social media. It's like, no problem. Don't worry, Matthew. We won't say those stupid things that you just said. So we get in there, and they say, would you like to go to makeup, Mr. McCarthy? I'm like, what? So we get all ready. I get mic'd up, and they take me around to the stage. Again, we're right in Midtown. It's the Stuart Varney show. Some of you may be familiar with it. Stuart Varney is this kind of really viper of a guy, really all over business leaders. And I was like, this is going to go great. And we got the ice cream out. We're serving ice cream to people in the back, and everybody's eating the ice cream. It's great. And everybody's got smiles on, which is great. We're kind of in the joy business at Ben & Jerry's. And they take me around, like, all right, your segment's coming up. Well, first they put you in the green room, and I'm in the green room like, this isn't helping, because you're watching the video of who's going before you. I'm like, you're just getting more and more scared about having to be on national television on a business program. And so they take you into the sound stage, and Stuart Varney's there, there's cameras all over the place, and I'm standing on the side. He's like, all right, when he's getting ready for the next segment, blah, 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 let's talk about the price of oil and the NASDAQ and the Ramalama-Ding-Dong, whatever else they're talking about. And plus, next up, I've got the CEO of Ben & Jerry's who's going to be here with us to talk about his company. Okay, and commercial break. And they kind of get you up there, and you go sit in the thing. And Stuart Varney's just going through his paper. I got a cup of ice cream. I'm ready to go, talk about the ice cream. And I like to eat ice cream when I'm doing interviews, by the way. It kind of puts things at ease. And I highly recommend it, whatever it puts you at ease. And so Stuart Varney looks to me and says, hi, Stuart. It's nice to meet you. He goes, okay, so we'll talk about your new flavor and maybe about business. So I said, okay, that sounds great. And then there's this guy standing over there. He's like this. And I'm like, oh, man. And so literally he's, all right, action. All right, I'm joined by Matthew McCarthy, the CEO of Ben & Jerry's. And he turns to me and says, Matthew McCarthy, why are you a socialist? I'm sitting there I got a spoon in hand. I'm like, are you shitting me? And I didn't know what to say. I froze. Well, we got this new flavor, terrible. And he's like, yeah, but you support Bernie Sanders. And I was like, I'm trying desperately to bridge. They teach in PR bridging tactics. When someone asks you a question here, you're like, can we get back to the ice cream? And when he said the Bernie thing, that actually kind of made me angry, because I was like, we don't support politicians at Ben & Jerry's. We support policies, we support change, we support fighting the systemic issues that cause marginalization. But we don't go politicking for politicians, especially when they're elections and stuff like that. We don't do that. And so I said, no, we don't support Bernie's. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't been prepared for this. And I'm sure my poor Sean, my PR guy's on the side, oh man, feeling like you. So at any rate, we kind of struggled through I struggled through the interview, and we talked about stuff, and they're rolling B-roll kind of in the background. So there's pictures of ice cream being made and happy people and whatnot. And so I get through the interview, and it wasn't terrible, I don't think, but you could probably find it online and have a good laugh. But we get to the end, and he's like, all right, and coming up next, we're going to talk about the NASDAQ and oil prices and some other ram-lam-a-ding-dong. And they go, okay, now we're to commercial break. And so I'm sitting there like, well, God, I'm glad that's over. And so I said to Stuart, I said, have you ever actually had Ben & Jerry's ice cream? And he said, this is hilarious. He said, no. I won't eat Ben & Jerry's ice cream. I came from Europe. I came from a country where socialism was the problem, and I escaped it. And I looked him dead in the face. It's the only kind of maybe thing that I did that had a little bit of chutzpah. I looked him right in the face. I said, Stuart, I'm a capitalist. I've been in business for 30 years. We're an extremely successful, profitable company. And by the way, it's owned by Unilever, which is a 60 billion euro major consumer packaged goods company. Sir, I'm a business person, and he didn't know what to say, because he had this whole narrative in his head about, I don't know, business or long-haired hippies with beards or whatnot. I think I didn't tell him I drove a Subaru. I mean, that would have been the end of that, right? And I tell this because I had just in my first couple months on the job, just basically decided we were going to grow Ben & Jerry's faster than it had ever been grown. And we also were going to take positions on things to drive the social mission further. Now, I didn't know how to do either of those things. I always like to say, I got 30 years of business experience, so I think I'm halfway decent at running companies. But on all those other issues, on climate justice, social justice, and all the detailed things that I had had some exposure to in my prior roles. And I'd been moving in this direction, but not really as deep as what was required at Ben & Jerry's. And so Stuart Varney, maybe I'll send him a thank you note one day. He helped me with two key things that I needed to, kind of was like a big slap in the face or like brick to the forehead type of moment. And it taught me, really highlighted for me two things. One is that I'm going to have to really fight a lot for the stuff that we're doing at Ben & Jerry's, particularly if we want to do more of them. And the second thing was, man, I'm going to have to attack these tropes about this or that. And that's come up consistently in all the talks since last night to today, this idea of dual narratives, things that have tensions. Gary talked about the tensions. We talked about the head and the heart. We talked about these things where there's kind of duality, but specifically as it relates to a business doing good things versus just doing less bad things or actually not giving a shit at all. That's one of the biggest tropes that I've set about trying to smash. This idea of, actually, I think the concept of the balance is inappropriate. A balance, when someone says to me, how do you balance? I get this question all the time, how do you balance growing your business, winning in the marketplace, driving the financial results that are required? And how do you balance that with, all those positions you guys take? And it's like the oldest question. I just stop people right there. I said, listen, a balance is fundamentally zero sum. When one side goes down, the other one goes up. And when the other side goes down, the other one goes up. That's bullshit. I want more growth, and I want to have more impact. That's it. I'm not saying it's easy. Let's not confuse simple and easy. A lot of simple things, and business people are really good at making things super complicated. It's not rocket science. I'm not saying it's easy, but it is pretty simple. And I reject the balance trope. How many people want to have less sales, but they did good things? How many people are like, yeah, I want to grow my sales, and I'm okay with, doing the wrong thing that's against my values? Right? If you just think about it, it doesn't make any sense. So I want and, not either or. And in fact, Ben & Jerry's is one of many great examples of companies that have created financial success, created economic growth and empowerment, employment, big profits, and a lot of great ice cream, not in spite of the positions, but because of them. And a lot of people the past few days have asked me a question that I do get a lot, particularly early stage companies where it's like, holy smokes, we don't have any money to pay the people the way that we want to pay them right now. Or our suppliers are just freaking all over us about this, that, or the other thing, and now this supply chain's taking longer and my bills are going to be this. How much of the social mission stuff can I do? I don't have a ready answer for that. I get asked that a real lot. How do you balance it? What I'd say is, you are what you do, right? In this world of hyper-transparency that we have now, when things started getting really, really transparent, particularly digital media, digital communications, the internet, and all related things really started to take off, transparency has really changed what public relations can be all about. In the past, senior executives could basically oh man, this is not a good issue we got going on here. Let's have a story on that. Right? Or let's have some talking points on that. And hyper-transparency has actually been phenomenal because it really has taken away the say and demotivated the say and in a huge way elevated the do. So you are what you do. And if you choose to park the stuff that you think is important to your values, the stuff you know is important to you, and you park it, you're going to own that consequence. I'm not saying that to shame anybody or whatnot. It's actually kind of a simple equation for me, particularly in the early stage of a company. What you do, and the early folks who choose to buy your product, your service, partner with you, whoever they might be, they're doing that because of you, because of the things you're doing. And actually, it gets sometimes harder as you scale. I think some early stage businesses think, well, when I am scaled, I'll have more money and a little bit more freedom to do these things. I'm here to tell you that that's not really the way it works. When things get bigger, you're still going to have bigger ambitions, and the price tag may be bigger, but percentage-wise it doesn't. So The beautiful thing about being in a world where you are what you do is that the people who are still living in the I am what I say, a lot of them are just dead and they don't even know it. Never before in the history of, like, say, modern business, if I go back kind of 80 or 90 years, never before has the pace of businesses getting disrupted by many of the entrepreneurs who are in this room been greater than today. That's a great thing. I'm perfectly comfortable if big companies go under. I don't want to see people lose their jobs because of bad decisions of senior executives. It has happened, it is happening, it's going to continue to happen. And the antidote for that is people who are putting values into what they do, not aside from it. So I'm a big believer in really focusing on the do, and then the say stuff kind of sorts itself out. A bit. So that was my Stuart Varney story. That's I was thinking about, like, how would I open up something that was really embarrassing. So I got a question for folks here. How many people here, by show of hands, are inspired by being here this weekend with these speakers and so many local folks? How many people are inspired? Okay, that's pretty high. Now, I'm not like I'm surprised by this. This is not a trick question. Now, by a show of hands to yourself, right? Because I don't want you to raise your hands. I want you to raise your hand to yourself. If you've recently, or maybe even this weekend, taken a decision to do something a lot bigger, you are constructively dissatisfied with your status quo. You want to do something that's maybe really disruptive, really big. So I want you to think for a second, and that's why I don't want you to put your hands up, because it doesn't matter what the other people think. What matters is if you believe you're going to do something bigger. So if you feel that, like, shit, this is the moment, I'm going to do that thing. I'm going to make that change. I'm going to take all the things that I've been learning recently, and maybe this weekend as a catalyst to take a big leap. If you're feeling that way, or you've actually taken that decision, I want you to raise your hand to yourself right now. All right. Now that I've said that, how many people, by show of hand, are feeling nervous about something? You've got some anxiety about the future. Okay, this is awesome. Listen, I've got some news for you. And I didn't know this at first. I used to kind of like spend most of my early days oh, that's uncomfortable. I'm just going to move away from that. If you're feeling nervous, if you're feeling agitated, if you're feeling a little scared about your own goals, I've got news for you. Get excited. All big things that we do as people and as teams are preceded by nervous feelings. Sometimes feelings of strong dissatisfaction with the status quo. I'll admit it. You know, when you look at some of the data that Jonathan shared, there's a lot of good reasons to feel dissatisfied with that. And to feel agita or angst or anxiety. There ain't a good thing that I've ever done in my life where I could point back and say, I think that was pretty good, that wasn't preceded with a lot of knots in my stomach. You know, feeling, oh, God, can I do this? Do I really have what it takes? Am I smart enough? Am I good enough? How am I going to do this? What happens? And so I've been training myself, and I'm not saying I'm there yet, but training myself that when I feel those feelings, hey, Matthew, get excited, because there's probably some good stuff right ahead. And is it a little bit of a ninja move on my brain? Maybe, but if I can short wire my emotions, that's okay too. I'm totally fine with that. We all know, and I'm not going to, nobody's really talking about how complex the world is. All the speakers and all the folks that have come up here and been actually the connective tissue between the speakers, we all know how challenging things are. Things were really challenging, and I observed lots of business executives under incredible duress before the pandemic. So if you think about the growth of artificial intelligence, you think about e-commerce, you think about digital media and digital communications, EDI with your suppliers, all these things. Before the pandemic, what I was seeing among my other executives, people senior to me, people peer to me, whatever it might be, was really feelings of fear. Because that old adage, what got me here is not going to get me there, was becoming more intense for lots of people. I don't care whether you had 10 or 20 or 30 years of experience. In fact, sometimes the more experience you had, the more agita I was seeing among some senior executives because they were feeling outdated. And then there was like, oh, fake it till you make it, and all this other stuff. And then the pandemic hit, and all hell breaks loose in all ways, for humans, for communities, and for all the businesses that they choose to be part of or other organizations they choose to be part of. And, you know, the pace of change is unfortunately, I think, framed as something to be scared of and something bad. And I think consultants are particularly good, particularly big business consultants, at making businesses feel scared about the pace of change. Like, oh, change, that's bad. Change is like awesome. Change, it's when things are bolted to the ground that we should feel frustrated. When change is happening, it creates huge opportunity. No great things happen when there isn't change and disruption happening. And the other thing is that I spent a bunch of my career early on we used to talk about gurus, like gurus of digital media, or digital, gurus of kind of social media. And one of the beautiful things about the pace of change is that it's two things. One, it's probably not going to slow down. I think we all kind of agree that change is not going to all of a sudden slow down. But more importantly, change is an incredible democratizing force. Just because you were the expert yesterday actually has very little bearing on whether you're not the expert today. And so that causes a lot of panic for senior people, and that's too bad for them. Honestly, they're going to have to redefine, their value proposition to their own organizations. But the pace of change, I believe, is an incredible democratizing force because it allows everybody in the organization, yourself, your teammates, everybody in your organization, whether it's a business or not, I'm going to use the word business a lot, but I mean organization, no matter how long you've been there, what your expertise is, you now have an opportunity to shape what gets done now, decisions that get taken now, and where that organization has an impact today and tomorrow more than ever before. That's the benefit of the democratization that the speed of change creates. The other thing that requires is that it really forces people with positional authority to either radically redistribute that authority and agency to the people on the front line in the organization, the people actually doing the work, or bankrupt the company. I mean, if you think about the pace of CEOs getting fired, CMOs turning, any C-suite, any senior person, I've never seen it. It's never been as fast as it is now. Board members, and everybody's like, I don't know. And I always joke with my team, the higher you go, the less you know, and that becomes truer every day because of the pace of change. And I say that not to belittle myself, because there are things that in my prior job as the CEO, there are things that only I can do, the stuff that only I can sign, bills that maybe only I could sign, or big decisions like, oh, we're trying to debate this, and Matthew's got to take a decision. But I really want those to be few and far between, because if they're going through me, that's a problem. Too slow. I'm very far away from the front line of the organization, and again, the higher you go, the less you know. And so I'm on a journey of redefining and kind of re-articulating what value do I even offer to the organization. And I think this is true of all founders and all C-suite executives. I don't care if you've got one employee yourself or you've got 10,000 employees. You know, Ben & Jerry's, we grew Ben & Jerry's to over $1 billion in sales. We're in over 30 countries, several hundred employees, and thousands of people that work in our scoop shops around the world. And I would often joke with people that, as the CEO, I just may be the most dangerous person in the company because I'm the furthest away from actually the stuff that matters most. I'm not saying I ate ice cream every day, right? We were often tasting ice creams and looking at innovations, but my job is not to do the R&D team's job. My job is not to do the culinary team's job. My job is not to do the brilliant marketers' jobs. And my job is not to do the social mission team's job on our climate and our social justice initiatives. So stepping back and actually finding, I'm not saying I did a good job at it, by the way. Please I don't want that to be subtext here. But this idea of senior executives, whether they're one of one or they're one of many, really have to redefine how they are radically redistributing power away from themselves, and probably redefining their role more as a sage or a guide, a shepherd. And the other thing I would say to my team often is, I'm not the future, you are. It's just the way it is, especially for CEOs. Now, I suppose you could stay as CEO forever, but that's probably not necessarily the best thing for everybody else, and giving other folks the opportunity. Everything about leadership requires courage, right? And I think courage there's a lot of mythology, barring Craig. I'm super inspired by Craig's work on mythology and lorology. I spent a lot of my, I'm a student of courage, organizational courage for people and organizations. And the reason I'm a student is because for a lot of my career, I didn't have enough of it. I watched people make decisions and take decisions because they were louder than me. They had their hand up in class faster than me. And they just seemed to demonstrate more confidence than I did. And I was like, oh, wow, that person's they seem really confident. They got a lot of courage in that. And then, we'd finally find out it was a stupid idea. It was a total stupid-ass idea. And I'd be like, Matthew, you should have put your hand up. You should have spoke up in that moment. And so, after many years of that, I started to kind of say, dude, you only have yourself to blame here. So not in a shame way, but like come on, And so I think there's a lot of mythology around courage. So when we think about courage, this is going to be a free word association. I'd love people to just shout out some words. There's no right or wrong answer. This is totally group work on this. I'm not going to no, you're wrong. So courage, what does it mean to you? No, really think about your own experience and forget everybody else in the room. Courage to you, what are some word associations? Confidence? I'm sorry? Fearless? Bravery, intestinal fortitude? Excuses? Thick skin. I'm sorry? Risk. Okay, what else? Action. What else? Fear. Strength. Did I hear humility? I'm sorry? Yeah. Okay. This is great. Listen, I will always be a student of courage, because if you want to do big things, you're going to be afraid. It's just kind of simple, and I do know that people who that say that fearlessness is really dangerous. It kind of goes a little bit to this idea of the hero. Someone who's truly fearless can often be very dangerous. Right? And particularly if you're trying to build and develop a people-centered organization where you're really bringing together your purpose, your head, your heart, your flourishing, your focus on yes. The bigger it is, the more afraid you're going to be, and that's totally normal. And courage for me, I used to think courage was just be tough enough I could do this thing, right? Or I could just act tough enough, And I don't think that was it. That was it either. I think courage often is common sense. We talk about things that were courageous, usually in the past tense. That person, that business, that was courageous what they did. When I go talk to people that I feel did courageous stuff, I say, holy shit, how'd you do that? That's with all those headwinds against your team or your business or, the anti-woke movement, whatever it might be, how did you do that? And usually people say, and back me up on this one, if you feel, you say, it's well, it was the right thing to do. And then later, we'll kind of talk about it as courageous. I don't know, people, I think we just need to be courageous here. And then I go out and, Stuart Varney, we're courageous. That's not the way it is. So often courage is common sense in the moment where you are clear, you've got clarity about your values, you've got clarity about your purpose and the shared purpose of the people that you've chosen to jam with, and you choose to do some stuff that makes you really nervous, but is going to be important, right? And the courage to do that often simply comes from the clarity that you've got about what it is you want to do and why you want to do it. I know that sounds really, really basic, but I think we make courage inaccessible to ourselves, and that's unnecessary. And so I believe that courage is often, it's kind of common sense, even if it's hard, even if you fail a lot. I'm not saying it's pleasant all the time, but moving towards things that you want to do, as long as they're consistent with your values, you have clarity about your values, you have clarity about your purpose, actually you can take a lot of punches. But if you're not clear and someone kind of comes at you and you may not be able to you may not have the resilience. And so I think a lot of courage is common sense. that flows from the clarity of your values and kind of why you're jamming with a certain group of people. I use the term commonplace also because I often in my head I would make things that I felt I needed to do out of my own reach by my own internal language, like heroism or fearlessness or whatnot. And reality is, courage it's kind of like a human right. Like we all have the capacity for courage. We all do. And it's kind of funny how, I'll speak personally, how I would move the bar away on doing courageous stuff, because it was like, I'm not sure if I can do that. I'm a crier, by the way, so bear with me. You're probably, what's wrong with this guy? His voice is cracking. But why I had these conversations with myself. Why am I moving the bar away in terms of making things accessible when they are consistent with my values? I know that for me, I like to grow businesses, I like to beat the competition, and I like to actually use the business to do good things. Right? I'm learning a lot more about those things now. I'm not a lifelong person that's been engaged in social and climate justice, but over the past decade, I'm learning a lot. Why would I move that bar further out when, in fact, courage, doing difficult things that I know are consistent, should be a daily practice? And the number one barrier we all know is here, right? It's here, sometimes here, like, I'm freaking out, whatever it might be. So I would encourage you to think about, when have you been at your most courageous and why? Very simple exercise. Grab a coffee or tea or a cider or whatnot, or Haagen-Dazs ice cream, and sit down and think of it. I'm serious. And think about it and say, when was I at my most courageous? But don't just say most. Look, you got to have more than one, and you all have hundreds and hundreds of them. When was I on the most courageous side of stuff? And how did that happen? What barrier did I overcome? What obstacles did I overcome? And this is a super simple thing. This is really, really simple. And I encourage you to make this part of your daily practice so that you remind yourself that you're actually super courageous right now. And I'm not saying to pump you up, I'm just saying it is a fact. And you also, I think, can benefit, and maybe some of you already do this, so I don't mean to be presumptive, but I find that I can benefit by making it part of my daily self-talk, my daily mantras, to talk about what courageous looks like. Not so that I can pat myself on the back or puff up my ego. And that's a really important point. That's not the point here. It's knowing that I want to do some things that are difficult. I've got some approach avoidance. I'm feeling some fear. I'm not sure how to handle this with my family, my significant other, my staff. Courage, making it commonplace is incredibly important. And the other thing I'd say about that is we talk about the courage of leaders, and almost like that leaders are the ones that have to have all the courage, or they have to have almost like a little bit of a monopoly on courage, that the CEO or a C-suite executive, they're the ones that need to take the tough calls, the tough decisions. I can't tell you how many times in my career I've seen tough, in quotes, masquerading as smart. We're just going to be bold, dumb. And I didn't, for most of my career, I didn't have the courage to say to people, listen, don't try to don't dress up this bad idea as we just need to take a tough call here. We just got to be tough here and do the tough thing. And it came up earlier, that Nick mentioned this, the easy wrong versus the difficult right. And so we talk about that in ourselves, and certainly if we are founders, if we are senior executives, if we're running our own organizations, we do have to have a daily practice, I believe, or maybe other day, where you're investigating what kind of courage you're bringing personally to your life, to do those things, to live your values. We're trying to live up to our values. That's one of the golden cables of this conversation, I think, is values, and then how do you live up to them? Purpose, and how do you have the intestinal fortitude to go actually do that when there's a lot of headwinds. But there's another thing that I think, that I have a hypothesis that I want to share with you that I think is more important than your courage, is that how do you democratize courage within your organization? And I think you see where I'm going. Your courage is important, and modeling courage is one of the most important things that we as leaders can do. Again, whether you work with one person or you got 10,000 people on your staff, modeling courage is important. But far, far more important is democratizing courage within your organization. And I'll say a little bit more about this, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I will tell you this, if you're in a business and your competitor is doing a better job at democratizing courage in their organization than you, they're going to beat you. Conversely, if you're able to democratize courage and make it more commonplace for the people in your teams, particularly people that don't actually look like they've got a lot of courage, or maybe they're more junior, or maybe you see that their self-esteem, they don't talk first in the meeting. Maybe their voice isn't being heard in your meetings, right? So I think this is an important and under-discussed thing, particularly when we talk about, there's just this like romanticizing about the founders and C-suite folks, and that's fine. That's fine, but I'm becoming less relevant every day. It doesn't actually matter what my positional authority is. Again, I ran a very large company with lots of employees and #1 packaged ice cream in the United States. But the reality is, all of my 30 years of business, the funny thing about experience is that 100% of it is in yesterday, right? No matter what I want to say, 100% of my experience is yesterday. So this idea of democratizing courage is all about creating these circumstances, the environment, a very rich and fertile environment, really employing the things that all the speakers and all the local leaders who have talked about here, particularly around the human-centered nature of the imperative for driving change. What does democratizing courage in your organization look like? Is a question you want to ask yourself. How will I know if I'm democratizing courage? Everybody has, I think, the human right to tap into their courage, right? It's not on the list of human rights, but certainly from a leadership perspective, it's our job to support people. But how do you know what it looks like? Is a question I would suggest that you ask yourself. How will I know I'm doing it? Because we talk about like inclusion, and DEI is already come under incredible fire most recently. It's really the anti-woke movement is really disgusting in lots of ways, and maybe that's for another talk. But the headwinds aren't going away because actually we are making progress. We need to make more of it, and the forces that don't want things to change are just going to continue to fight harder. So that's why you need everybody on your team jazzed up and tapping into their own courage. There's no pump-up speech that you can give people that's going to last much longer than that pump-up speech. You can jazz people up with a current crisis or an opportunity, but that's kind of foxhole mentality, actually. And we need foxhole mentality sometimes. Sometimes we are in crises. We need to be more directive. We need to take control. We need to exercise our leadership control in organizations to deal with crises. But most things are not that way. And if you can find a way to democratize courage within your organization, you really will unlock a lot of the eye of inclusion. Are people feeling heard? Are their voices being part of the discussion? I need to work more with some experts to take this idea of kind of organizational courage and connect it with inclusion. Because we all know, I shouldn't say it that way, for folks that work in racial equity and DEI, that representation is a symptom. Representation for different peoples and different voices by itself does very little. The goal is not representation. Let's have diversity as a representation. The power of diversity is when people are actually taking action. I heard action said a couple of times when it relates to courage. So, so I'll pause there for a second. I'm going to shift to another. What are we doing on time here, anyways? So give me a time check, because I'd like to do a little cute. Huh? What's that? 3:43. When do you want to wrap up?
Like 5 minutes.
Okay. So, and we can do. Are we getting together outside or something like that?
Yeah.
All right. So we'll do Q&A kind of. We'll do Q&A here. Okay, cool. Groovy. So one of the couple of the thoughts that I wanted to touch on briefly is, and it's come up a number of times from a lot of smart and talented people who've been speaking around the power of trust. Trust is, man, oh man, I've done so many stupid things that hurt trust when I think back. Trust is absolutely the lifeblood of courage. You could argue that trust is lots of things, but on this topic of courage, I don't care how many consultants I don't know how many books you read, I don't care what, if you're not actually building trust, forget about courage. Not rocket science, is it? But trust, and trust means it's a big fat word, I acknowledge that. But if people don't trust you, they won't help you. And if they don't help you, you're not going to change the world or change these 3 counties, change this valley. If people don't trust you, they won't want to tap into their courage for you or their coworkers. And so this idea of that as leaders, we are by definition in the trust business, whether we know it or accept it or not. And so that's an additional question I would respectfully ask people to think about. I ask myself all the time, what does trust look like? How can I get help creating more trust in my organization? Do people trust me? Do they trust each other? People will not take big leaps if they don't feel that they have each other's backs. Again, not rocket science, but pretty scarce in organizations, particularly with the pressures that people are under. You put people under pressure, you put organizations under pressure, we all go back to our easier toolboxes. This is kind of psychology 101, but really what we need is to leap forward. And so when I think about that kind of, use that analogy of the golden cable of kind of courage for yourself, democratizing courage, and the nature of trust and how important that is. Really, I would say that these are your most important KPIs. Sales, profit, enrollment, market share. I argue that those KPIs are symptoms. They're important symptoms because very often that's what we're measuring or that's what the financial folks like. But I would argue, my experience is that sales, profit, market share, affinity with your consumers, household penetration, social followers are symptoms of a team that has courage at the top, democratized courage across the organization, and trust as the number one. Those are progenitors of all great outcomes. And I'm a big believer also in the forensics of success and the forensics of failure. We are today upstream from all of tomorrow's successes and failures, and we have that incredible opportunity to drive that change. The last thing I'd say, and we can maybe wrap up and do a little Q&A, is that I see myself as kind of like running around with cans of gasoline looking for sparks. I know maybe not a great analogy, so I'm sorry. It's a petrochemical analogy, and it's not an ode to the industry in the area. But I find that a lot of my job, particularly the further I've gone in organizations and a lot of privileged opportunities that I've had, is I feel like I'm running around looking for sparks, and I want to like get down on my knees and start fanning them. Like, right? It's like that little, ball of stuff, and you're like, and then I come over and I want to fan them and whatnot. And so I would just just want to say a big thank you to Sandy and the team for letting me be part of all this. And I'd love to actually do a little Q&A. You want to wrap up a little Q&A? All right. Any questions? Anything I say, you're like, that's total bullshit. I don't agree with that at all. Hi.
Oh, geez. Yes, speak to the box.
What's one way that you implemented democratization at Ben & Jerry's? What's an example?
Yeah, okay. One of the biggest focuses for our business, particularly in Europe for Ben & Jerry's, was immigration, the rights for immigration and asylum seekers. And there's a number of countries in Europe, you've seen it in the news maybe, it's horrendous what is done to immigrants. Literally anti-human rights, people dying in boats, and people being put in detention centers. Period. And I'll be happy to argue with anybody if they feel like the way that countries treat immigrants is a good thing. I know very little about the topic. So right out of the gate, when the team came to me with some pretty heavy-duty things that they wanted to do. I think also the team felt that I was up for a bunch of stuff. It's like, oh, let's take this into Matthew. But my job was not to approve those things, but was actually to instigate. So for me, when the team came in, when they said to me, we want to do this, here's the situation. We want to put this post out. We want to do this campaign. And we want to go directly at major politicians in the UK. I was like, whoa. So, And by the way, my parent company's headquarters, Unilever, its headquarters is in London. So, but I had to hide some of that reaction, honestly. I say hide it, I think hide's not a good way, but kind of basically set that aside for a moment. And so, because the last thing they should hear is, hey, we're all jazzed up about this thing. This is total bullshit what they're doing, let's say in a country like the UK in terms of its policies specifically, and really regressive anti-humanitarian policies. The last thing I want them to see on my face is, ooh. Like, talk about like CEO screwing the whole thing up, right? Like, let me hear cold water, let me grab another bucket. So the first thing is actually managing myself. I'm not saying I do a good job of it. I'm not saying I did a good job. But managing myself, knowing that we were up for big stuff, and I had put the call to action. Let's double down, let's triple down on these things that Ben & Jerry's stands for, because the forces are really going the other way, for crying out loud, on some of these social justice and climate justice issues. So that was the first thing, is I gotta manage myself, all right? And I gotta think about that. How do I manage myself? Because positional authority is real, and I don't wanna screw that up, right? And I screw it up a lot. The second thing was to provoke, as I said, I alluded to a moment ago. And I would ask the team questions. And when I first started with Ben & Jerry's, one of the social mission folks was like, they wanted to call President Trump on one of our packages of ice cream. And I was like, oh, boy. I was in the job like 90 days. I was like, oh, can we just say, but I didn't say that. And he said to me, when I was asking questions, I was saying, well, what's your goal? Why do you could do this campaign with or without naming the Trump administration. Why do you want to do that? And he said, well, Matthew, if you're not behind this and you're not up for it, I said, stop right there. Don't misinterpret me asking questions and me trying to understand what you're trying to do and make it better as code for I'm going to give you the runaround. Now, I was challenging him. He obviously had that experience with leaders in the past. And so I wasn't trying to chastise him, because clearly he's, Matthew's going to ask us 15 questions. And at the end of the day, in a week, he's going to say no. And people are afraid of that, particularly the most courageous people in the organization. They are afraid that the senior people are going to be, yeah, too expensive. Yeah, maybe later. Can you do this analysis 10 more times? Bullshit. Like they're going to have a vote on this thing in like a week and a half. And so that was usually my first question. Do we have to do this right now? No. So managing myself and being really clear about why I'm asking and provocative questions in order to make the program as strong as it can be. And often they had the expertise there. A lot of the questions I was asking was about damage control, risk management. Because I got 30 years of business experience. I've failed a lot. I've screwed a lot of things up, way more than my staff has. That's an area that I can bring value in. I've screwed a lot of stuff up. I've seen other teams screw stuff up. So how do I use my powers of inquiry and curiosity that were talked about a lot over the past couple of days to help the team? But be really clear with them, why am I asking this question? I'm not asking you this because I'm hoping that if I ask you enough questions, you'll go away and you won't do this really kind of scary program that's going to cause a lot of PR. No. I'm doing it because of this, this, and this. And even when there were times when I knew that I was going to get called out, I'm fine with that. That's part of my job, for crying out loud. That's why I need your help, staff. Please educate me. And when they ask me this, what do I say? Not, when they ask me this, what am I supposed to say? No, let's actually work through it. Let's work through that. Thank you for that question.
One more.
Lucky person.
The lawn.
Thank you.
You mentioned daily courage and giving yourself little pep talks about courage. Can you give us some examples of what you might have said or how you might have done that?
Ooh, yes. I wouldn't call them, thank you for the question, I wouldn't call them pep talks. I used to give myself pep talks, but the pep didn't last very long. Like, I'm like, oh, pep up. And then like this huge crappy thing would like, and I'm like, I can't pep myself up to deal with this frickin' problem. So I'm not to pick on that term, but I'm glad you asked it that way, because this isn't about, for me, this isn't about psyching yourself up or like, yeah. I do like to look in the mirror and go, yeah. There are times for that, right? Power moves and yeah. But one of the things that I had to do that I really had to, that was a daily thing for me, is when we took the positions on Ben & Jerry's around Black Lives Matter. So, sorry. So when George Floyd was killed, we got together as a team, and we knew we needed to do something, right? Just as Ben & Jerry's, we basically came together and said, hold on. These are just the latest, most public versions of inhumane treatment to lots of people of color. These just happen to be public. It's not just George Floyd, it's not just Breonna Taylor, but a whole series of things that we've been tracking and working on. And so once we had decided there's positions that we wanted to take around white supremacy culture, really moving kind of beyond some of the language and really through the work with some of our partners, Advancement Project National Office, Race Forward, Movement for Black Lives. They weren't hollow positions, they were actually pretty meaty based on the expertise of our partners in the markets. And that's been the business model. But what happened is this was going on, is that there was a lot of support, not only in the United States, but around the world and in the markets that we operate, for something has got to change after George Floyd was murdered. But then the anti-woke movement got a hold of this and has since been pushing back on those things. So when we would use language around defund the police, when we would use language around Black Lives Matter, when we would talk about front-end criminal justice reform as part of our social mission work, again, with our grassroots partners, I would get lots of questions from people outside the company and from the parent company. What's this about? Particularly as we were owned by a European company. And they're like, what the hell's going on over there in America? And should you even be talking about this stuff? Again, not that Unilever wasn't supportive. Our parent company is incredibly supportive of Ben & Jerry's. And Ben & Jerry's has thrived actually under Unilever. That's not just me saying it to hero Unilever, but the company has actually done extremely well. And when Unilever bought the company in 2000, they knew exactly what they were buying. That doesn't stop the fact that the anti-woke movement is putting incredible pressure through media, the business press, investors. Why are you using this inflammatory language? Well, first of all, you may find it inflammatory, but that's the language of the people in the movement. So, and this had gone on for a long time, because every time we wanted to put out a new piece, a blog or explaining, when we say defund the police, what are we actually talking about? This isn't, an anti-police thing. What are we really talking about here? I had to learn about it, and I'm not an expert in these topics. And I had to be a translator to people who were far less knowledgeable than me in different, let's say stakeholders. And that actually was pretty grueling, to be honest with you. So I had to find every day, usually every day, every week, ways to, and a pep talk would have never gotten me up to that. So I had to become at least proficient enough in the issue, and then find out ways to talk to stakeholders, not just to say, get the hell out of here, we're doing it because we're Ben & Jerry's. That's not really helpful. How can I be the educator of other people and the translator for other people when I myself am not the expert? This is one of the things that happens, because none of us can be experts in everything. And to have those conversations, I had to prepare for those conversations and really model through how I wanted those conversations to go. And often I would use role-playing with my staff, the people with the experts, because they weren't going to be in the room. These were usually confidential conversations that related to public relations and statements, and lots of people backlashing. And you see it every day now. Bud Light, the biggest brand in the United States. Disney! That's just not going to stop. And I don't say that with negative. I say it with almost like a smirk, right? The anti-woke movement is really afraid about the change that we've made and the changes that we're about to make. And things aren't going to get easier. There isn't anything that isn't political anymore. Everything is political to somebody. And so when people would say to us, and I'll wrap up on this, when someone, the funniest thing is people like, I'd go on Twitter and people like, why don't you just stick to making ice cream? It's the stupidest thing, right? I'm not buying any more Ben & Jerry's. And we always joke like, these people, whoever's wrote that never bought Ben & Jerry's anyways. Boycott Ben & Jerry's. And we'd have a good laugh about it because there's a saying in my former employer's office, we would say, nothing drives sales like a good boycott. Thank you very much. I'm going to wrap up on that one. Thank you. Thank you.
So can we just give first a huge thank you to Willie and Pearson and Patrick, who run the center and made this so smoothly. To all of you, to all of the speakers and the presenters, just thank you, everybody. This morning, my true co-creator and the one who really made this whole day, along with Kristen Brandt, incredibly smooth this whole weekend, Sue sent me this poem that she remembered she wrote a couple years ago. And she's going to read a couple parts to it, which is amazing. And then we're just going to spend like 5 minutes hearing from you on ideas. And one piece on that survey that we talked about, we just realized, and Betsy, wherever you are, I am so sorry. Like when we listed the presenters, we kind of forgot Betsy. I'm not really sure how that happened. So if you could write Betsy in on that survey, and there's a box outside on the counter if you want to fill it out that way too. So Sue, be the poet.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for being here. I'm so honored to be in this room with all of these amazing people. This came to me during Jonathan's talk yesterday when he asked the question, where do we want to go? And I was like, wait, I know this. I've written this. So this poem, if you all remember a couple years ago, was the centennial of the founding of Teton County, Wyoming. And there was this big celebration, and they were calling it the Centennial Celebration. So the challenge, it was through the library and I think the Historic Society, was what does Teton County look like in 100 years? And so I submitted this to this contest. You can read the rest of it. I have a Substack, Sue Muncaster, if you want to hear more, but this is what I said, and I'm giving this to you. This is my audacious dream, and it's taking courage to read it to you, so my fantasy of what could be. After years of pandemics, climate crisis, civil war, and suicides, the food stopped growing, the oil stopped flowing, and the sky darkened under a blood moon. The earth wept, the animals spoke, the people had become soft, languishing in technological wonders and addictions to false joy. But the Tetons stood tall, and the people who loved them organized. They turned to Shoshone and Arapaho elders, to farmers and ranchers, to teachers and survivalists, to the women and children, to the mountain guides, to their intuitive dogs and horses, to the native animals and plants, to the spirits of the adventurers who died here, to the storms and the stars and the moon. Some meditated, some prayed, some paddled, some summited. They stopped talking at the same time and listened to the tears of voices unheard. They touched, they hugged, and looked into the eyes of the elk on the refuge. With enhanced awareness, courage, and optimism, they stopped breathing the toxic smoke of fundamentalism, perfectionism, competition, tribalism, celebrity, and unfettered growth. Time was short, the world was watching. A grand sacrifice, they let nature manifest the way. They reimagined technology, business, and government, and harnessed environmentally sustainable capitalism. The ones who stayed would do anything for their fields and livestock, for the feel of powdered snow on their eyelashes, for the discovery of a chanterelle, for the thrill of whitewater, for the sight of a speckled fawn, to meditate and paint at sunrise, to dance under the summer stars, for the sweet purple kiss of a child eating huckleberries and the shimmer of a trout slithering through their fingers. Connection replaced consumerism, purpose-enhanced profits. Sustainability replaced selfishness. The workers were no longer simply inputs. They met the present with an open mind, and as the earth healed, they healed themselves. Visitors returned home, inspired to share what they learned. The environment no longer their personal domain. They always gave more than they took and grew rich in spirit and joy. So, thank you. I do want to recognize Sandy and Lynn and Gary and thank them very much for trusting in me and bringing me along in their journey. And I'm super appreciative to all of you, especially all my leaders from Teton Valley. Thank you.
So, come here. Hello. Good. So, I want you all to get out on this beautiful day. It might, well, I think it's going to be a beautiful week, which is awesome. But to the first question, like, why did you guys come?
Someone.
Anybody? Yeah.
Alicia.
I want to volunteer, say, my team to be happier while doing what we're doing for the community. I want them to get inspired, and I don't know how to do it, so I came here to be a better leader.
Did it work?
Yes. I have a couple of notes, and I recorded a little bit of things that I think they were very inspired, and I'm going to share with them to see if that sparks some of the fire.
Cool. So all of these talks were recorded, and we'll figure out how to put them on YouTube under TLC. So we'll get organized. But everything was here, so we'll be able to share it broadly and widely, and you'll be able to share it with anybody who you want. And if you could, on that, we do have a blog, or what's it called, a newsletter, called TetonLeadershipCenter.org. If you go on TLC, if you could join, that would be great. And it's another way where you can get the links and stuff. And we promise not to put a lot into your inbox, because I hate that. So why else did you come? Yeah.
I've been lucky enough to get to participate in the Teams program for the last 2 years with Silicon Couloir, and just really love their mission, and so this seems like a natural extension of that, of getting to build leadership in the Valley, and it seems like the right thing to do.
That's validating.
Kristen, did you have your hand raised?
Inspiration. Just pretty much anything you put together is always amazing. So.
Can I record that?
Yeah. True story.
What about, yeah, I saw your hand.
Excited to learn and meet more people. I love this community, and every chance I get to make it better, I'm for it, and I also want to grow in my career.
Wasn't that beautiful, whoever said here, America the Beautiful? Let's remember that. Jackson Hole the Beautiful. Like that energy. Yeah.
I looked at your list of speakers and said, wow, this is an incredible opportunity to be in front of some of the brightest, most inspiring people. So I have to make this work.
Thank you all for saying yes. Thank you. So if you could have this go forward, and you were the magic fairy godmother, where should this go? What do we do next? We have this course that we talked about. There's information out there with great Kat. Can you raise your hand? Lizanne, Fred, right? Fred, raise your hand. So we'd love to have a cohort. Our max is 25, as it's the first class, so we want to all learn together. And Jonathan's going to be on October 24th to go deeper into the survey. And then I think Phil Hartle and Will Morrow are going to talk about ESG and the challenges with finance. So we're going to keep in this, complex topics in community conversations. So we'll keep doing that. But what else? Like if you could envision, yeah.
Two things. One, I think Jonathan, beginning, set in charge. I mean, I think this, to get a group together to think about how we tell the story of the future here in the Tetons, and particularly, I think these three things are not three separate commissions. It's one story of environment, economy, community. And the other, talking to Nick, at least my age, Gary, that cohort groups of looking for purpose at our stage of life, for, a semi-retired, this group, I imagine there's a young group, and like if we could organize cohorts to get together following this, and we talk together as little support groups of what's our purpose at age 60-ish, what's your purpose at age 30-ish, and help us, go further with this kind of quick little thing we did about what are your values and stuff. But so bringing those groups together, I'd love to be part of it.
Ooh, doesn't that sound fun?
I feel like I'm still part of that 30-ish group, no?
We're in our 60s now, just saying.
There we go, the delusional group here. Exactly. It's everywhere.
Cool. Yeah, Kathleen.
I think, I'm not sure how this would be framed, but periodically, if the work that's being done or our learnings or, taking key topics from a summit like this and somehow creating a town hall where it's just, and especially all the different business owners that we have who could really benefit from, I don't know, keep creating some sort of forum where you can just have a mini information share would be great.
Huge. And we have this dream of the database of all of that goes from anecdotal to actually, really research-based. Yeah, huge.
How many of you would like to come back to a conference next year? Would you bring 10 friends?
Sorry, then we wouldn't fit.
Oh, we wouldn't.
But we could live stream it.
I have a question, I guess.
Oh, there's a couple more. Yeah.
I like the idea of breaking into cohorts, and I would suggest that besides doing it along age lines, that you also do it between sectors, so business, education, healthcare, so that when we meet with our group, we can really focus on that particular area that we're working in.
Super cool. Yeah, and
Yeah, and I was just going to say to add on to the cohort conversation, what Rick said, I think, there's a lot of different demographics represented in this room, and as Jonathan showed us in the first day, I think there is probably a large underrepresentation of the community that we're trying to most foster and remain in Teton County. I think there's a lot of people in that younger age group that have a lot of ideas that want to be part of leadership and be involved in the community and maybe don't really know how to do so as well. And coming to things like this is really inspiring, really cool to get to connect and see how others have done so. But yeah, really fostering that and allowing those of us that are younger and want to, jump in and take a stand in our community to do so in a way that feels, a little reduces the barrier to entry and to do so.
awesome. Yeah, Chris.
I would say, Teton County is such a unique bubble. We're the richest county in the U.S. and in Wyoming, clearly, and our politics and everything is so different than the rest of the state of Wyoming. And obviously, Teton Valley and Idaho and Sublette County is all part of that. But I think if we expanded it, to the state of Wyoming or to the Mountain West and other similar, maybe like ski town communities like this, or other places in Wyoming where there is this industry and this growth and need for more leaders as well. Like we really opened it up to be kind of a hub for that where other people in this region can come to as well.
I think that is part of our goal, too, to see this go further out across the state and even the region. So.
And my question was going to be exactly that, like how we'd love feedback at some point on how we export this, or if we can export this, not just to the region and the state, but frankly as widely as it's needed.
Can I just comment on something like that? What we are experiencing here, every special place literally in the world is going through.
the kinds of challenges that are being created by technology, they're creating the same sort of challenges and, to Matthew's point, opportunities in literally every special place in the world. They're hallmarked by things like affordable housing problems, traffic problems, growing income inequality, and a real level of angst about where things are going, and a real disruption of underlying dynamics. And to Matthew's point, it also creates a lot of opportunities. The thing that I would argue that makes us unique and not just special, we're really delusional and thinking we're unique in a lot of things, but actually we're just, there are a lot of places that are really nice places in the world, but the thing that really makes us unique is our environmental health. Gary alluded to it yesterday. I believe in the history of the world, we're the only place that's developed a successful contemporary economy and maintain a fully intact, fully functioning ecosystem. Nobody's figured out how to keep that going. I hope I'm wrong in that assumption, but I haven't been able to find another place. So that's the real opportunity, because if we can find the balance that everybody's been talking about and find that inspiration, we can literally change the world.
So, yeah. Oh, sorry, yeah. Great idea, absolutely. And our hope was with the speakers, with really, Betsy and Nick and Craig and Jim, is all of that, those 35,000 decisions we make every day. It touches all of us, and I love your idea. We had to start somewhere, and to know that this is just the first step on a journey. And come and let's talk, because yes.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I'd just like to comment again that part of the focus around entrepreneurship came from also our source of funding. So, and it's also part of Silicon Coular's mission as well, is to really support entrepreneurship. And so there's a key link there that led us to kind of the focus here today. But certainly as years go by, and we hope this becomes an organization that just continues to stand up on its own and grow, we want to be more and more inclusive each and every year. So thanks for your comments.
Because it really is about community and that holistic interconnectivity of everybody. There's one last person I need to thank, because as everybody said, and Matthew really alluded to, like when you have a spark of an idea and then you say go forward, it can be terrifying and your stomach can feel really sick, and you can have lots of existential crises and nervous breakdowns. And just to thank Tom Adams, who's been by my side for the last few months, and these guys, when I'm like, no, we should really do it in 2024, how fun. And the last thing that just comes to me is a man, I can't remember his first name, but Harari wrote a book called Sapiens about a decade ago. And it's a really cool book if you haven't read it, but he tries to figure out why did Homo sapiens take over Neanderthals. And he really talks about it's because of community. It's because of our ability to take myth and make strength out of story that isn't physical and visceral. And what I've heard today and been so inspired by your questions and by everybody here is that America the beautiful, us, the beautiful inside, not outside. The power of that to say we can be the change we most want to see starts with us. And that's the cool thing of where do we want to go together? How do we get there in our diversity, in our inclusiveness, in our uniqueness, in our ability to listen to each other and hold that space? And I think that's the hope, and that goes back to all those pictures we saw yesterday of the kids, of many of us who worked on this to say, let's lay that future. So I just want to say thank you. Any?
I'm just going to make a promo if I can. Our pitch day is coming up on October 4th, just like a week and a half away, and it's an amazing thing. It's at the center, it's free, and it's just an extension of all the things that we're doing right here. So it's put on by Silicon Core, and I don't want to step on this, but thank you.
Absolutely. So email us, hello, or Sandy or Sue at tetonleadershipcenter.org with ideas, thoughts, critique. Please fill out the survey so we can build it. Loved all these ideas. If you're interested in doing more together, the course, the talks, and we'll figure out what's next after that. So just deepest thanks. All the speakers, the books are out there, and have a great, great evening. On all of this is going to help us get it on the website. Yay!